Chapter 492 I'll go. There were many types of cultivators in Jianghu, but the worst matchup for a ghost cultivator was without a doubt a ward cultivator. It was because a ward cultivator could set up wards that would hinder a ghost cultivator in all sorts of ways. The powerful ones could even create wards with a single thought. There was just no way for a ghost cultivator to get close to one and assassinate them. Other types of cultivators did not get such luxury. Generally speaking, their best counter against a ghost cultivator was to stay put. It wasn't an easy tactic to pull off though. For starters, it required a tremendous amount of courage and self-confidence to pull off. It was because the moment a ghost cultivator revealed themselves was also the moment they executed their killing move. If they could not counter the attack, then they would just die. This was how Jianghu had defeated his opponent. He had not managed to detect the ghost cultivator until he unleashed his attack, but he was also aware that a ghost cultivator must get close to him before executing their killing move. That was his opening to launch his counter-attack. His sword was unbelievably swift. He had blocked the ghost cultivator's killing move and wounded him at the same time. The exchange had barely lasted an instant, but the ghost cultivator was seriously injured already. If his instinct hadn't urged him to take a step backward, he would have died from the attack already. That was just how deadly sword cultivators were. His opponent wasn't done, however. As the ghost cultivator backed away, he caught a glimpse of a sky full of swords speeding toward him. Feeling as cold as an iceberg, he immediately slapped a golden body talisman paper on his body and cried out, "I surrender." There was a series of tooting sounds before the golden light protecting the ghost cultivator shattered. One of the swords pierced through his right chest and triggered a shower of blood. Having just barely survived the enemy's exchange, the ghost cultivator immediately jumped into the air and escaped back to the spirit peak. He relaxed only when he was caught by Xia Qianqian. He would be dead if he hadn't used the middle-grade golden body talisman paper in time. Even so, he was injured so badly that it was unlikely he would be able to participate in the battle royale. Sword cultivators were infamous for their killing arts for a reason. In the valley, Jianghu remained rooted where he was as if he had beaten the ghost cultivator without moving a muscle. A couple of swords were floating around him, and he was holding a sword with his right hand and folding his left arm behind his back. He looked very impressive right now. Cheers immediately broke out from the opposite spirit peak. There was no doubt that Jianghu's easy and instantaneous victory had uplifted their morale tremendously. On the other hand, everyone in Xia Qianqian's group was wearing grim looks on their faces. The female spell cultivator in particular looked as pale as a sheet. The mere idea of going up against the sword cultivator was enough to make her quake in her boots. During the early stages of a cultivator's life, spell cultivators were easily the bane of all combat cultivators. It was because the spell cultivator held an overwhelming range advantage over the combat cultivator. Theoretically speaking, the combat cultivator was nothing more than target practice to a spell cultivator as long as they could be kept at bay. This advantage gradually disappeared as everyone grew stronger, however. At the Cloud River realm level, there was no one a spell cultivator feared more than a sword cultivator. It was because their speed was among the highest, of course. It was practically impossible for a spell cultivator to keep a sword cultivator at bay with their spells, and once the sword cultivator got close enough to attack them, their fragile body meant that there was almost no chance they might survive an attack. This was doubly true for the female spell cultivator because she was only at the 4th order. It would be a miracle if she managed to put even a scratch on Jianghu's body. "I'll do it," the body-tempering cultivator cracked his neck before striding toward the battlefield, causing the female spell cultivator to let out a clear sigh of relief. After the body-tempering cultivator landed on the valley, he raised a shield spirit artifact and lowered his stance slightly. Despite his large stature, the shield was big enough to cover his front completely. Earth and yellow spiritual power and blood-red vitality mingled together into an orange aura that protected him from all sides. Finally, he assumed a defensive stance. For a body-tempering cultivator, all-out defense was their only viable tactic against a true sword cultivator. There was no way he could outspeed Jianghu, so charging him would just be a waste of time. He would only be humiliating himself if he tried. All-out defense would allow him to exhaust his enemy's power and give him the opportunity to land a counter-attack. In fact, it was his only method of winning against any opponent who was faster than him. Sadly, assuming that both sides shared the same cultivation level, the body-tempering cultivator was almost always slower than their opponent. This meant that they almost never got to seize the initiative of a battle. Jianghu didn't do anything. Not yet. He simply waited for the body-tempering cultivator to finish his preparations. He was completely looking down on his opponent, and to be fair, he possessed the right to be arrogant. Sword cultivators were notorious for their deadliness. The body-tempering cultivator could literally transform into a tortoise and hide in his shell, and the sword cultivator might yet cut him in half. The second the body-tempering cultivator was ready, the swords floating around Jianghu abruptly shot toward him. Giant metallic sparks flew everywhere as they slammed into the shield spirit artifact and shook the body-tempering cultivator repeatedly. The one-sided offense continued for about 3 breaths before the number of lights flying about the body-tempering cultivator abruptly increased. It was Jianghu bringing out more swords to attack the poor guy from multiple angles. While the body-tempering cultivator was able to block most of the swords with his shield spirit artifact, a small number of them were able to slip through the gaps and pierce through his protective aura. The body-tempering cultivator was definitely sturdy though. The protective aura made of spiritual power and vitality was so dense that even Jianghu's swords could only leave some insignificant wounds on his body. It wasn't long before the body-tempering cultivator suffered cuts across his whole body. However, the man hadn't made a sound throughout the fight, almost as if he wasn't the one who was being attacked. The body-tempering cultivator hadn't been idle during the one-sided attack. He was observing his opponent for openings and preparing to launch a counterattack as well. If a sword cultivator was the bane of all spell cultivators at the Cloud River realm level, then the bane of all sword cultivators would be a sturdy body-tempering cultivator. While sword cultivators possessed some of the strongest offensive power of all types of cultivators, their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. It was because they sacrificed endurance in favor of higher damage output. Given enough time, they almost always ran out of stamina and spiritual power before other cultivators. That was why a sturdy body-tempering cultivator was the best counter to a sword cultivator. It was also why the body-tempering cultivator had offered to challenge Jianghu. The female spell cultivator might be terrified of a sword cultivator, and for good reason. He wasn't. As long as he could outlast his enemy's greatest assault, he would be able to turn the tables on them. Jianghu's assault lasted an entire cup of tea's time. It was to the point where even the body-tempering cultivator's shield spirit artifact had dimmed considerably. As for the body-tempering cultivator himself, his back looked like it was stitched together by cuts, not skin. It was at this moment the body-tempering cultivator suddenly noticed that his opponent's attacks had become weak. Even the duration between each attack had become noticeably longer. A steely glint entered his eyes. He knew that the time to launch his counterattack had arrived. He bent down a little before launching himself forward with both legs. Still holding his shield spirit artifact in front of him, he swiftly shortened the distance between himself and Jianghu like an arrow. Boom boom boom. Each step he took shook the earth like an earthquake. Jianghu's expression did not change despite the incoming threat. At the same time, the sky of swords abruptly converged in front of him to form a gigantic sword. The sword was exactly 10 meters long. It emanated a terrifying amount of spiritual power. The body-tempering cultivator's pupils constricted when he realized the danger. He immediately came to a stop and raised his shield spirit artifact above his head. Crouching a little and sinking his feet into the ground, he cycled his vitality and spiritual power to the max and caused his orange aura to shine like the sun. Jianghu gestured at the body-tempering cultivator before whispering, "Cut." The gigantic sword immediately dropped down on the body-tempering cultivator's head. There was a massive explosion as light filled the valley. For a time, the spectators could not even see what was going on the battlefield, much less perceive the state of the two combatants. When the light finally faded, Xia Qianshan was standing on the battlefield and blocking at least a dozen swords with a thick spiritual power shield. Lying on the ground behind her was the bloodied body-tempering cultivator. It was impossible to say if he was still alive. If Xia Qianshan hadn't rescued the body-tempering in time, Jianghu would have killed him, 100%. Jianghu raised his eyebrows. He was obviously displeased with the interruption. Xia Qianshan said expressionlessly, "He surrenders." Jianghu stubbornly held Xia Qianshan's gaze, however. The spell cultivator narrowed her eyes dangerously as she added, "Are you trying to provoke me? Are you sure?" On the opposite spirit peak, the young man called out, "Since fellow cultivator Xia has called for surrender on behalf of the body-tempering cultivator, let him go, Jianghu." He did not want to escalate this into an all-out, no-holds-barred battle. If he did, there was no way Jianghu was a match for Xia Qianshan. Their cultivation level was just too far apart. It was only then the sword cultivator finally withdrew his sword. Xia Chanshan stared at him for a while longer before wrapping the unconscious body-tempering cultivator with her spiritual power and carrying him back to the spirit peak. The sword cultivator remained unmoved. He resembled an invincible war god. On the spirit peak, the fourth order spell cultivator looked like she could cry at any moment. "Senior sister, there's no way I can fight that guy." Jiang Liuzi was able to crush even a fifth order body-tempering cultivator. What could she, a fourth order spell cultivator, possibly do against him? Try to act cute and get him to lower his guard? Judging from his no-nonsense appearance, it would probably end in failure anyway. Meanwhile, Xia Chanshan was scrunching her pretty eyebrows while checking the body-tempering cultivator's injuries. So far, every single one of their cultivators had been seriously injured. Although they were not in danger of dying, it was impossible to expect them to participate in the battle royale. On the other hand, the enemy group had only lost their spell cultivator. Their first combatant, a combat cultivator, was still battle-ready. Her fears had come true. The situation was extremely disadvantageous toward them right now. She looked at Lu Yi. The plan was for him to go last, but it would seem that that was no longer possible. "I'll go." Lu Yi got the message and stepped forward. He didn't care when his turn was. He had been paid to participate in this battle, and so he would. The sword cultivator named Jiang Liuzi was definitely exceptional. Lu Yi reckoned that he was at least a top 10 ranker back on the Spirit Creek battlefield. But so what? During the few months he dominated the Scroll of Supremacy, Lan Zi was the only one who earned his respect. Everyone else was trash compared to her. He was a little disadvantaged, sure. He was 2 minor realms lower than his enemy. But again, so what? Since he became a cultivator, he had always fought enemies who were technically stronger than him and came out ahead. He slowly descended to the valley and stopped about 160 meters away from Jiang Liuzi. Chapter 493. Something smells fishy. In terms of age, Lu Yi and Jiang Liuzi were practically peers. They were both geniuses to be able to enter the Cloud River battlefield as young as they were. However, Lu Yi was currently covering his face with a fox mask. Jiang Liuzi could tell from his appearance that he was a man, but that was it. This greatly displeased Jiang Liuzi. Generally speaking, a person who needed to hide their face in day-to-day dealings was bad news. That wasn't the only thing that frustrated the sword cultivator. He was unable to tell what type of cultivator Lu Yi was. At first glance, Lu Yi looked like a combat cultivator. Only a combat cultivator would choose to wear tight-fitting clothes that did not restrict their movement. On the opposite spectrum, only spell cultivators would choose to wear baggy clothes with massive sleeves. On the other hand, Lu Yi was also carrying a small, white-colored spirit beast on his shoulder, so perhaps he was a beast tamer. He could not say for certain though. There were many cultivators who took a spirit beast with them on their journey, but not all of them were beast tamers. So, he was facing off against someone who might or might not be a combat cultivator and or a beast tamer. The thought alone made him, a sword cultivator who dedicated his life solely to the sword, feel like puking. The guy in front of him had to be a treacherous bastard who used deception and underhanded methods to win his battles, or he would not need these disguises. Speaking of disguises, the face mask he chose to cover his face was absolutely loathsome. It was clearly another way to keep him on his toes. Jiang Liuzi immediately launched a flying sword at Lu Yi after that. Most sword cultivators had a one-track mind. In Jiang Liuzi's case, there was no one he loathed more than crafty little shits who swindled their way to victory. It did not matter what type of cultivator Lu Yi was. He would know once he forced him to act. The flying sword moved so fast that it crossed over 100 meters of distance in nearly an instant. Jiang Liuzi expected Lu Yi to dodge out of the way, but to his surprise, Lu Yi responded by unleashing a flying weapon of his own. Sparks erupted from the point of impact as sword clashed against sword. He's fast. For the first time, a sliver of eagerness entered Jiang Liuzi's expression. Although the exchange was brief, it was enough for him to glimpse a lot of things. For starters, he could tell that his opponent possessed incredible reaction speed. Second, he was tremendously confident in his own abilities. He would not have been able to remain calm and react perfectly to a sword cultivator's sword otherwise. This was exactly the type of opponent a sword cultivator needed to face to hone themselves. He wouldn't say that his previous opponents were weak, but they were unable to draw out his interest at all because they lacked certain qualities. His first sword was blocked, but that was hardly the only flying weapon Jiang Liuzi possessed. Another 3 flew toward Lu Yi from different angles. Lu Yi met the attack head-on with another 3 flying weapons of his own. Clang clang clang. Metallic clangs resounded throughout the valley as the 6 swords clashed in the space between the 2 cultivators. It sounded like a mini-war was going on even though neither man moved a muscle. A short while later, Jianghu's expression morphed into surprise. It was because he realized that he was losing the flying weapon duel. They were both controlling 4 flying weapons, but his opponent's telekinesis skills were clearly superior to his. Not only was Lu Yi controlling his swords like his own finger, he noticed that the weapons would flash from time to time. Every time they did, their speed and power would increase drastically. Bastard, just how strong is his mind to overcome me in a flying weapon duel? What shocked Jianghu even more was Lu Yi's spiritual power. He could sense that he was just a third-order Cloud River Realm cultivator. Jianghu was usually the one challenging opponents whose cultivation level was higher than his. He had never been on the receiving end and losing until now, not to mention that Lu Yi was 2 minor realms below him. It was so absurd that, for a second he actually wondered if he was hallucinating. Realizing that his enemy was going to push back against him if he did not do something soon, Jianghu gritted his teeth and unleashed another 9 swords. If his skill wasn't on par with his enemies, then he would compensate for that weakness with quantity. The battle immediately climbed to a new level of intensity as a dozen swords chased after each other in the air. While keeping his enemies' flying weapons busy, Jianghu sent the rest after Lu Yi himself. Lu Yi still had swords to spare, however. His final 3 flying swords exited his weapon holder with a whoosh. The clash continued, and Jianghu felt even more frustrated than before. Despite having deployed at least a dozen flying swords, he was only able to fight Lu Yi to a standstill. In fact, he strongly suspected that Lu Yi could control more than 9 flying weapons. He could not possibly display the level of fine control he was displaying otherwise. He was right. Lu Yi could control more than 9 flying weapons. In fact, he could control more since he was just a mere Spirit Creek Realm cultivator. The reason he didn't refine more flying weapons was out of consideration of their offensive power and their upkeep when deployed. Lu Yi was a combat cultivator. He excelled in many areas thanks to the Tree of Glyphs, but his main fighting style was ultimately close-quarter combat. From his perspective, the way of telekinesis was just one way to deal with enemies beyond his normal range. He saw no need to push it to its absolute limits, not to mention that the weapon holder could only nurture a maximum of 9 flying weapons. Killing intent flashed across Jianghu's expression as he unleashed another 10 flying swords. Let's see how you deal with this. He thought grimly to himself. It wasn't a bad tactic. Lu Yi literally did not have any more flying weapons to spare, and the 10 flying swords were coming at him from multiple directions. Left with no choice, the combat cultivator channeled his fire attribute spiritual power into one hand and fired a fire phoenix at the incoming swords. The fire phoenix looked so lifelike that even the feathers were clearly visible. At the same time, he fired a fire dragon technique with the other hand. On the spirit peak, the 4th order spell cultivator cried out in surprise after seeing this. What incredible cast speed! Is he a spell cultivator, senior sister? Just like Jianghu, the female spell cultivator still hadn't figured out what type of cultivator Lu Yi was even now. It wasn't like she could ask him about it. It was only now that she had a good reference point to venture a guess. Instead of answering, Xia Qianqian recalled her experiences in the myriad beasts domain. Once upon a time, she naively thought that Lu Yi was a pure combat cultivator as well. However, she gradually learned how wrong she was when Lu Yi displayed his attainment in beast taming, wards, spells and more. Sometimes, Xia Qianqian literally wondered if Lu Yi was a monster clad in human skin. Was it truly possible for anyone to be this talented? There were countless wannabes who tried to dabble in multiple ways, especially during the start of their cultivation journey. Most of them failed miserably, and the few who succeeded never truly excelled in their secondary cultivations. Lu Yi was the only one she ever knew who dabbled in multiple ways and, against all odds, excelled in all of them. Just look at the spells he was casting right now. Anyone would have believed that he was a true spell cultivator judging from their power and cast speed. There was no way he could cast as quickly as he did if he hadn't invested an enormous amount of time into studying and practicing his spells. However, as someone who had fought side by side with Lu Yi, Xia Qianqian knew that that would be a huge mistake. In the valley, the battle had risen to a new crescendo after the probing stage was over. Swords and spells flew all over the battlefield. Lu Yi had picked up the Fire Phoenix technique and Fire Dragon technique way back when he cultivated the Red Lotus Sky Mnemonic. Naturally, he wouldn't forget these spell techniques. This was especially true for the Fire Phoenix technique. Ever since he obtained the glyph, Fire Phoenix, he had been getting better and better at casting the spell. It was also a lot more powerful than before. However, the Fire Dragon technique and Fire Phoenix technique weren't the only spell techniques he could cast. He had unlocked many spell-type glyphs on the Tree of Glyphs, including Golden Arc, Lightning Invoking, Leaf Dance, Fire, Water Arrow and Earth Protrusion. If he constructed the glyphs individually, he could totally use them to blast his enemies into smithereens. Of course, he could also use them to set up offensive wards and so on. It all depended on where and how he applied the glyphs. He had never intended to become a spell cultivator, but there was no denying that he was going further and further down the way due to the Tree of Glyphs unlocking these glyphs. If he wanted to pretend to be a spell cultivator, literally no one could see through his disguise. Unfortunately, he could never fool anyone on the Spirit Creek battlefield because everyone knew Louis Yi of the Crimson Blood sect was a saber-using combat cultivator. They might be wowed by his spell proficiency, but they would never mistake him for an actual spell cultivator. It was different in the Cloud River battlefield though. Even before he acquired the face masks, no one had recognized him as Louis Yi of the Crimson Blood sect. Meanwhile, Jiang Liuzi thought he discovered the truth when he saw Lu Yi casting the multiple spells to block his flying swords. He's a spell cultivator. Rage immediately followed the realization. As a sword cultivator, the last cultivator he was afraid of was a spell cultivator. It was because he was their natural counter. However, not only was said spell cultivator blocking all of his flying swords right now, the Sanuvabich was 2 minor realms below him. How could he possibly endure this humiliation? An ordinary cultivator would have found the shame unbearable, let alone someone as prideful as Jiang Liuzi. Previously he only used his flying swords because he thought his telekinesis was enough to defeat or slay Lu Yi. It was also a common probing technique. Unfortunately, reality proved to be a harsh mistress. Who would have thought that he, a top 10 ranker of the Scroll of Supremacy and a powerful sword cultivator, would be outdone by a spell cultivator who was 2 minor realms below him? Then again, he should have known that the world was a vast place. If telekinesis isn't enough to defeat him, then Jiang Liuzi abruptly withdrew all of his flying swords. At the same time, a sword appeared in his hand seemingly out of nowhere. When he wiped his fingers across the blade, and his spiritual power surged, the flying sword started spinning around him like a hurricane. While hidden behind a storm of flying swords, Jiang Liuzi launched himself forward and charged toward Lu Yi at high speed. All the spells and flying weapons Lu Yi fired at him were blocked by the blade hurricane. Not only that, the sword cultivator reached Lu Ye's flank in the blink of an eye. No one truly saw how Jiang Liuzi got there. Sword cultivators were just that fast. Without pause, Jiang Liuzi thrust his sword toward Lu Ye's neck. Die. On the spirit peak, the female spell cultivator let out a cry of surprise and fear. Xia Qianshan's heartbeat had quickened as well. Although she knew Lu Yi was strong enough to defeat opponents above his cultivation level, it was clear that Jiang Liuzi was no ordinary 5th-order sword cultivator. It was a coin toss whether Lu Yi could actually defeat his opponent. Jiang Liuzi was sure he could kill Lu Yi with the strike, but his expression morphed into shock all of a sudden. It was because he noticed a saber appearing in Lu Ye's hand at the same time he thrust his sword forward. Something smells fishy about this. Lu Ye's raging spiritual power was abruptly withdrawn into his body. At the same time, he placed one hand on the inviolable and another on the sheath. His vitality began churning and mingling with ambers. His right arm swelled a little, and there was a brief lull that was not unlike the calm before the storm. Then, violent energy poured out of Lu Yi like a volcanic eruption. Flash! The saber left its sheath, spilling blood and sending Jiang Liuzi flying even faster than he was charging earlier. His eyes widened in disbelief even as he did his best to catch himself. The saber flashed again and a crescent-shaped energy flew straight toward him. Oh, that wasn't all. Lu Yi kicked off the ground hard enough to crack it and followed behind his own energy attack like a shadow. At the same time, he controlled all 9 of his flying weapons to attack Jiang Liuzi from all sides. Chapter 494. How is he so lucky? Jiang Liuzi felt his blood turning into ice. He felt as if he had accidentally disturbed an ancient beast's slumber, and the angry creature was now attacking him with all its power. He could barely breathe from the sheer amount of pressure pressing down on him from all sides. This bastard, he's a combat cultivator. It was only now that Jiang Liuzi finally realized Lu Ye's true faction. The foxy bastard was really a combat cultivator. Everything he had shown off until now was a ruse meant to mislead him. How deceitful. There was no time to be distracted, however. Jiang Liuzi quickly cleared his mind and conjured multiple energy blooms with his sword. However, Lu Yi easily cut them all with his flame-wreathed, sharp-edge-empowered saber. It wasn't long before metal clashed against metal, and Jianghu was flung uncontrollably into the air once more. A massive, bone-deep wound had appeared on his chest as well. The wound was inflicted when Lu Yi was surprised earlier. Jianghu had defeated 2 opponents beforehand, and the fight against the body-tempering cultivator especially had used up much of his reserves. Now that he was seriously injured as well, his cool was lost as a matter of course. Even his aura was starting to grow a little disjointed. Every strike Lu Yi dished out felt almost impossible to block. His violent strength and impossible speed wasn't something a third-order cultivator should possess at all. Looking at his explosive power alone, Jianghu could almost believe that Lu Yi was a body-tempering cultivator who honed his body. After all, brute strength was a body-tempering cultivator's greatest strength and privilege. His speed though, that was something even he, a fifth-order sword cultivator, could not hope to match. As if that wasn't bad enough, something was extremely off about his saber. Sometimes a blow would feel as light as a feather. Sometimes he felt as if he was trying to block a literal mountain. The only warning he got was the intermittent flashes. It was impossible to guard against it effectively. No matter how much he backed away, he was unable to weaken his opponent's storm-like assault by even a little. In less than 10 breaths, he had suffered a couple more wounds that exposed his bones. The worst of them all was a penetrating wound. Normally, a penetrating wound wasn't a big problem as long as it didn't hit a vital spot, but Jianghu clearly felt something erupting inside his body right as the saber pierced through his flesh. It was many tiny spikes skewering his internal organs. His energy was swiftly leaving his body. He was literally seeing double due to how much blood he had lost. Despite this, he refused to surrender the battle. He was a sword cultivator, and a sword cultivator would rather break than bend to another. He would rather die than surrender to his enemy. If he had one regret, it would be falling for Lu Yi's ruse just because his spells looked as impressive as a spell cultivator's. If he wasn't so certain in his judgment, he might have been able to avoid taking that decisive blow and put on a better fight. The sword cultivator had encountered plenty of deceitful people in his life, but he had never encountered one as cunning as Lu Yi. His earlier performance was just too convincing. Since one was a combat cultivator capable of casting a large variety of spells at high speed. The spells were pretty powerful as well. Anyone would have thought that he was a spell cultivator. When Jianghu glanced at Lu Yi once more, he felt as if the combat cultivator was silently mocking him from behind his mask. He immediately lost control of his composure and vomited a mouthful of blood. Jianghu gritted his teeth and began pouring all of his spiritual power into his sword. The spiritual artifact began shining like a mini-sun. Jianghu's intention was obvious to Lu Yi, but he saw no reason to be afraid whatsoever. He was dominating the sword cultivator in every manner possible. He was confident he could block Jianghu's trump card no matter what it was. His vitality surged and mingled even closer with Amber's. Their combined vitality began flowing into his right arm. Before Lu Yi could execute his blade technique and end Jianghu's life though, he suddenly frowned and leaped at least 30 meters back. Meanwhile, Jianghu had finished channeling his final move and fired a shockingly powerful sword beam at Lu Yi. However, a figure descended from above and blocked the attack with his hand. He was none other than the young man leading the opposing group. The young man was in the 9th order, but Jianghu's final move still managed to drive him back a few steps and disturb his aura a little. After he caught his footing, he faced toward Lu Yi and declared with a frown, "I surrender on behalf of my companion." He could do this because Xia Qianshan had set a precedent earlier. He also knew Jianghu was probably going to die here if he refused to step out. The problem with sword cultivators was that they were as bad-tempered as they were one-track-minded. If Lu Yi's cultivation level was identical or higher than Jianghu's, then the sword cultivator could have swallowed this defeat. However, Lu Yi was 2 minor realms below him. How could he possibly endure such humiliation? It would damage or even destroy his sword heart to surrender to a theoretically weaker foe. As soon as the young man finished his declaration, he heard something hitting the ground with a dull thud. He turned around and saw that it was a bloody Jianghu dropping to his knees. That final move had clearly depleted all of his strength. The young man then turned back toward Lu Yi and said, "You're incredible." What else could he say? The mysterious young man had literally defeated Jianghu, a powerful sword cultivator who was 2 minor realms above him. Sure, there was a bit of deception involved, but that didn't mean he was weak by any means. If anything, it proved the opposite. Just who is this guy? The young man was sure that Lu Yi was pretty famous in the Spirit Creek battlefield. Judging from his cultivation level, he could not have entered the Cloud River battlefield more than half a year ago. In any case, it shouldn't be difficult to discern his identity despite the face mask. All he had to do was ask around to see if there was anyone in the Spirit Creek battlefield who distinguished themselves in the past half a year or so. The young man carried the unconscious Jiang Liuzi in his arms and flew away. Lu Yi stayed where he was and waited for his next opponent to step up. To be fair, his fight against Jiang Liuzi wasn't completely fair. For starters, the sword cultivator had used up some of his strength during the earlier fights. 2. His deception and subsequent surprise attack was literally perfect. No one, not even he, could have figured out his true fighting style and reacted accordingly. A surprise attack that powerful could only be blocked with sufficient preparation and defense, and sword cultivators were hardly famous for their defense. Of course, Lu Yi was confident he could have beaten Jiang Liuzi in a perfectly fair fight. His opponent wasn't weak, but his composure could definitely use some work. It would just take a bit of work was all. On the Spirit Peak, the Fourth Order spell cultivator's mouth had turned into an O shape. It would remain that way for a very, very long time. When she thought that Lu Yi was a spell cultivator, she was still worried for his safety despite his exceptional performance. That was because a sword cultivator just possessed too much of an advantage over a spell cultivator. The fight would be over as soon as the sword cultivator got close enough to attack them. When Jiang Liuzi appeared next to Lu Yi almost like magic and attempted to stab him, she thought for sure that was the end of the battle and Lu Yi's life. Then the young man had pulled out a saber out of seemingly nowhere and proceeded to whoop Jiang Liuzi's ass so hard even his mother wouldn't be able to recognize him. It was such a drastic turn of events that the woman was unable to regain her composure even now. Is he a combat cultivator, senior sister? The spell cultivator asked a little too late. I guess, Xia Qianshan replied vaguely. No one label truly fit Lu Yi. He's incredible. The spell cultivator declared ecstatically and admiringly. She had no idea where her senior sister found him, but he was beyond incredible to put it mildly. Jiang Liuzi had already wowed her to no end, but Lu Yi had made him look like a small fry. The world truly was a vast place. Lu Yi's genius made an ordinary cultivator like her feel as small as an ant. On the opposite Spirit Peak, after the young man finished inspecting Jiang Liuzi's injuries with another cultivator, he warned, "Be careful. Something's fishy about that guy." No one could have anticipated this outcome. It was so unbelievable that the Ninth Order young man even wondered if Lu Yi was wearing a spirit artifact that concealed his true cultivation level. After all, how was it possible for a Third Order cultivator to be this powerful? The youngster he was speaking to shared similar features with Jiang Liuzi. He just looked a little shadier than the sword cultivator. He nodded and declared, "That bastard won't live to see another day." The youngster's name was Jiang Qingzi, and Lu Yi had just destroyed his blood-related brother. Of course the youngster was beyond livid. On the inside he swore to engrave the word terror into Lu Yi's heart before killing him. In a fair fight Jiang Liuzi would beat him 10 out of 10 times. But when it came to killing, not even 3 Jiang Liuzis were a match for him. It was because he was a ghost cultivator. Jiang Qingzi leaped over the cliff and landed in the valley. He then ran straight toward Lu Yi. Lu Yi watched as the ghost cultivator turned invisible after taking just a few steps. Jiang Qingzi couldn't see his expression, but he was just barely suppressing the urge to chuckle. A ghost cultivator, huh? Of all the known cultivation factions, there was no one Lu Yi loved to face more than a ghost cultivator. It was because they loved nothing more than to exploit their connection to the nether, skulk over to their target, and attack them from behind. Here's the problem. Ever since Lu Yi left the lost city of Xianyuan, he had encountered exactly one ghost cultivator who managed to remain concealed from his senses, and that was only because the ghost cultivator never entered his range until the end. As for the others, it was as if they weren't even communing with the nether. Imagine that you were a ghost cultivator, and you were sneaking up to your target while your concealment skill was running at full capacity. You had no reason to believe that your target was able to sense you at all. Then, right as you were about to assassinate them, they turned around and put a saber right through your heart. Just how scary was that? In any case, a ghost cultivator who could not conceal themselves was just a poor man's combat cultivator. In fact, they were far inferior to their combative counterparts in terms of combat abilities. The second Lu Yi saw his opponent turning invisible, he immediately applied insight to his eyes and rushed forward. His view changed drastically, and all kinds of invisible colors suddenly entered his view. Lu Yi had a hard time adapting to insight the first time he constructed the glyph. Now he had long since adapted to the strange view. On the other hand, Jiang Qingzi was both surprised and impressed that Lu Yi would dare to rush him, a ghost cultivator. Generally speaking, the best way to deal with a ghost cultivator was to stay where you were. It was how Jiang Liuzi had defeated his ghost cultivator earlier. Most of the time, a cultivator who charged a ghost cultivator who just turned invisible was hoping to score a lucky hit. Theoretically speaking, they could knock the ghost cultivator out of their invisibility right from the get-go if they were lucky enough to attack the right location, and if their attack covered a wide enough space. Unfortunately, the tactic rarely worked in practice. In Jiang Qingzi's case, every single opponent who had tried this tactic against him had had their asses handed to them. From his perspective, he was sure that Lu Yi was attempting the same tactic. He quickly discovered that he was wrong, however. Although Lu Yi was charging toward him, he wasn't attacking at all. To be specific, he was expecting Lu Yi to cast a massive spell or execute a wide-reaching blade technique or something. Instead, he merely launched his 9 flying weapons toward his exact location. Jiang Qingzi frowned and swerved out of the way. However, the flying weapons abruptly scattered in every direction and knocked Jiang Qingzi out of his invisibility. While holding a dagger in front of his face, it was how he had parried the sudden attack. Jiang Qingzi screamed inside his heart, "How is the Sanuvabich so lucky?" Chapter 495, and the winner is... Jiang Qingzi looked completely astonished as he reappeared into view. He never imagined that Lu Yi would be able to break his invisibility in just a matter of seconds. He did not think it was because Lu Yi was capable of sensing him, however. He attributed the success to pure, unadulterated luck. After all, how many people had done what Lu Yi did and actually succeeded in forcing a ghost cultivator to reveal themselves right from the get-go? There was a reason staying still was considered the superior tactic in dealing with a ghost cultivator, not the opposite. He had just sent the flying weapon flying when his vision abruptly darkened without warning. He looked up just in time to see a fox mask with slanted eyes and pointed lips looming over him like a tombstone. Jiang Qingzi's astonishment was interrupted by a flash of metal and alarm bells ringing loudly in his head. He hurriedly raised his dagger to parry the second attack, but... He was successful, but he was immediately overcome by the same shock his brother had felt when he was being pushed back by Lu Yi. What the hell is this strength? Jiang Qingzi kept falling as Lu Yi continued the assault like a storm. Just 5 breaths later, he hit the ground hard enough to leave a small pit. The ghost cultivator bared his teeth and hissed in pain as he lay motionlessly in the pit. He felt as if his elbow was broken, and there wasn't a part of his body that didn't hurt like a bitch. It was true that he was a ghost cultivator. It was also true that he couldn't perform nearly as well as a combat cultivator in a straight fight. However, he was a 5th-order Cloud River Realm ghost cultivator, and his opponent a mere 3rd-order Cloud River Realm cultivator. Just how was it possible for Lu Yi to suppress him so easily? Suddenly he felt death falling toward him from above. He hurriedly cried out, "I surrender." The saber that would have taken his life stopped just short of his forehead. In fact, the tip of the blade exuded just enough spiritual power to pierce his skin and bleed him. Despite himself, Jiang Qingzi still broke out in cold sweat. If he had been a millisecond slower, he would be on his way to the underworld already. His brother might be a sword cultivator who would rather die than surrender to someone who was technically his inferior. He didn't share the sentiment. He was a ghost cultivator. Sure, it was humiliating to lose to an opponent who was 2 minor realms below his cultivation level, but being humiliated was still better than being dead. Plus, this was a job, not a feud. There was no need to risk his neck for a job. Lu Yi withdrew his saber, and Jiang Qingzi hurriedly climbed to his feet and flew away from him. On the Spirit Peak, the 4th-order female spell cultivator blurted unconsciously, "Unthinkable." She knew that Lu Yi was strong, but she never expected him to take out the enemy ghost cultivator so quickly. Individual strength did not matter too much when going up against a ghost cultivator because they specialized in killing cultivators who were 1 or even multiple minor realms above their level. There were countless accomplished cultivators who ultimately succumbed to ghost cultivators despite their legend and accomplishments because their abilities were practically cheating given the right circumstances. The spell cultivator had been worried for Lu Yi's safety when Jiang Qingzi had concealed himself. Then, the combat cultivator ended the fight so quickly it was like the ghost cultivator had never turned invisible. She and her sect mates were practically trash compared to him. On the opposite Spirit Peak, the 9th-order young man was watching Lu Yi with a frown. His side still had 1 5th-order body tempering cultivator, but he knew there was no chance he would be able to win after watching Lu Ye's performance. So, he looked toward the opposite spirit peak and declared, "This last man standing is yours." What was the point of continuing this bout when the winner had already been decided? When he recruited the Jiang brothers at the beginning, he thought for sure that victory was perfectly within his grasp. However, Xia Qianqian had managed to surprise him. Just who is that bastard? The young man was brimming with curiosity right now. "Shall we move on with the battle royale then?" Xia Qianqian asked. The young man looked hesitant. "I don't know. Over half our combatants are incapacitated, aren't they?" At first, they were hoping to have a last man standing, a battle royale, and a final duel between their two ninth-order cultivators if the first two bouts weren't enough to decide the victor. However, the very first last man standing had left over half of their combatants incapacitated. It wasn't like they couldn't proceed with the battle royale with their current numbers, but the young man was pretty sure that his side would lose if they did. It was because their strongest cultivator, Jiang Liuzi, was still unconscious, while the enemy's strongest, Lu Yi, looked perfectly fresh. Jiang Qingzi was battle-ready, but he had lost his fighting spirit after having his ass handed to him by Lu Yi. He highly doubted he would be able to perform anywhere close to his normal standards even if he was still willing to participate. "What do you want to do then?" "Let's skip the battle royale for now and duel each other first," the young man said indifferently. "You really are itching to get your ass kicked." Xia Qianqian was already standing in the valley when she said this. "Well done, you six. Just leave the rest to me." Lu Yi nodded and took off into the air. It would seem that neither combatants were patient people because they were fighting before he had even returned to the spirit peak. What surprised him was that the ninth-order young man was also a spell cultivator. In that sense, Xia Qianqian was fighting against a peer. The two flew all over the valley while throwing massive spells at each other. It wasn't long before the entire valley was reduced to ruins. Lu Yi spectated the battle in silence. In fact, he enjoyed watching other people fight because he could always pick up some tricks here and there. For example, Xia Qianqian was unknowingly teaching him how to neutralize a threat, and the young man how to find an opening in a spell cultivator's defense. Suddenly he felt a pair of eyes burning a hole in his face. He turned and came face to face with a pair of beautiful eyes. "Yes." The female spell cultivator hurriedly shook her head. "It's nothing. You're incredible, you know that?" Lu Yi nodded. "I'm well aware." The female spell cultivator? The battle between the two ninth-order spell cultivators was as intense as it was entertaining, but Lu Yi was unable to discern who was the stronger one between the duo even after some time had passed. This probably meant that the duel was going to end in a draw, and that they were going to proceed with the battle royale after all. The female spell cultivator clearly noticed the same thing because she moved closer to Lu Yi and whispered, "Junior brother, please keep me safe when the battle royale begins." Behind the fox mask, Lu Ye's gaze shifted downward for an instant before he replied, "Sure. You're such a good person, junior brother." The female spell cultivator broke into a wide smile. For some reason, Amber suddenly started growling at her from atop Lu Ye's shoulder. She wanted to give it a pat, but the white tiger surprised her by biting her all of a sudden. It didn't break her skin, but it still hurt her enough to let out a cry of pain. She looked both hurt and confused by Amber's aggression. Suddenly, the two ninth-order spell cultivators stopped fighting and stood a good distance away from each other. A while later, the young man said, "The arcane glade is yours." He hadn't lost the fight, but he couldn't defeat Xia Qianqian without going all out either. This meant that his side had almost no chance to win the battle royale. In that case, he might as well concede the fight now. "Guess you're not stupid after all," Xia Qianqian replied with a harumph. The young man looked over Xia Qianqian's shoulder to stare at Lu Yi for a second. Then he turned away and flew off into the horizon on his spirit boat. When Xia Qianqian returned to the spirit peak, the female spell cultivator welcomed her with great cheer. "You're amazing, senior sister." However, Xia Qianqian shook her head and said, "I didn't win. The duel had ended with a draw at best. I guess my role here is done, fellow cultivator Xia. If there is nothing else, then I shall be taking my leave," Lu Yi said while taking a step forward. "Wait. Why don't we check out the arcane glade first?" Xia Qianqian said before bringing out her flying spirit artifact and piling the wounded on top of it. She then waved for Lu Yi to follow. "Come." Lu Yi saw no reason to disagree. As expected, the arcane glade was just a short distance away from the valley. It was located atop a spirit peak. After everyone had landed in the arcane glade, Lu Yi looked around and spotted the spirit sprout almost immediately. The spirit sprout was currently spouting world spiritual chi into the surroundings. It was also nearly identical to his first arcane glade in the sense that it was also a small, tertius grade arcane glade. You're more than welcome to stay if you want to. You'll be joining as the fifth and final member of this arcane glade, so that's just perfect. It's only a tertius level arcane glade, sure, but it should still fulfill your cultivation needs, Xia Qianshan explained. A small arcane glade like this was best guarded by a 5-man group. They could add more members to improve its security, but there wouldn't be enough world spiritual chi for everyone. Moreover, a 5-man group was strong enough to defend the arcane glade against most threats. Finally, Lu Yi had proven himself to be an exceptional cultivator who could defeat powerful 5th-order cultivators with little trouble. Of course, Xia Qianshan wanted him to stay and protect her sect mates. She wasn't going to force him if he was unwilling though. Another 3rd-order cultivator would have agreed to the offer so fast their head might fall off, but Lu Yi was no ordinary 3rd-order cultivator. His skill with wards alone guaranteed him a position in practically any arcane glade that was tertius level or below. Thank you, but I need to search for my junior brother. Lu Yi turned her down gently. Xia Qianshan nodded. Very well. Before you leave, can you set up some protective wards for us? Lu Yi rolled his eyes at her. I was wondering why she invited me to the arcane glade even though our business is over. I should have known that she wouldn't let me go until she had squeezed every ounce of value from me. I can do that, but you'll have to provide me with the ward flags and ward keystones. Lu Yi did not mind setting up some protective wards for Xia Qianshan's sect mates. It was a fairly easy job for a ward cultivator like him, but he wasn't going to offer his own materials as a matter of course. The keystones of a grand defensive ward alone cost a lot of contribution points, not to mention that the grand defensive ward wasn't the only thing he would be establishing. The ward flags were hardly cheap either. I already bought everything, Xia Qianshan said before tossing a storage bag into his hands. She had anticipated this and purchased a full set of grand defensive ward and ton of ward flags when she visited Lu Yi at the Divine Trade Association earlier. Lu Yi was a bit disgruntled, but he could hardly complain when the woman had anticipated and prepared everything. After opening the storage bag and checking out its contents, he discovered that Xia Qianshan had not purchased the best grand defensive ward there was. For starters, he counted only 8 ward keystones. On second thought, this was just a small arcane glade. There was no need to purchase the best available grand ward when a normal one would suffice. Take the grand defensive ward Lu Yi had set up at his own arcane glade earlier. That one had been made of 16 ward keystones, but an enemy still managed to breach it by force and destroyed all of the ward keystones. His total loss amounted to over 10,000 contribution points. And so Lu Yi went to work. In the meantime, the wounded treated their own injuries, and Xia Qianshan cultivated in silence. The female spell cultivator was the only one sticking to Lu Ye's side and praising him to the high heavens every once in a while. It was clear she was hoping that Lu Yi would change his mind and stay with them. His presence would be a great assurance to them all. It grew to the point where Amber manifested its true self and pushed her to the ground when she wasn't looking. It then opened its bloody maw and let out a mighty roar. Having received the threat loud and clear, the female spell cultivator finally kept her distance from Lu Yi. Lu Yi spent the whole day setting up a grand defensive ward, a grand concealment ward, an alarm ward and a couple of offensive wards throughout the arcane glade. Then he sought out Xia Qianshan and handed her the control gem. Finally, he told her about the location of the wards and demonstrated how each and every one of them should be used. It was only then that he wrapped up his business and got ready to leave. Chapter 496, A Big Fish? Xia Qianshan and the female spell cultivator saw Lu Yi off as he flew away. The female spell cultivator kept waving her hand with a yearning look on her face. Xia Qianshan shot her a look and said, "He's already gone, you little wench. You can stop waving your hand now." The female spell cultivator immediately deflated. "How can you say that? It was your idea." "Yes, and you failed." "So useless," Xia Qianshan criticized in a disappointed tone. "It's not my fault. He's just too resistant to feminine charm," the female spell cultivator complained in an aggrieved tone. She had already tried her best to win Lu Yi over to her side, but he still chose to leave in the end. "Whatever. Take good care of them, okay? I'll send a ward cultivator your way when I find one," Xia Qianshan instructed before passing the control gem to the female spell cultivator and rising into the sky. "Bye, senior sister," the female spell cultivator said and waved her hand again. Lu Yi was still wearing his fox mask as he cut a straight line across the sky. Right now he felt like there was nowhere he couldn't go. Back in the Spirit Creek battlefield, there was practically nowhere he could go without being recognized and pursued like a rat. It felt wonderful not having to look behind his back every step of the way. When nighttime came, he landed in a random cave in the wilderness to catch some rest. It wasn't long before he started a fire inside the cave and began barbecuing a large chunk of meat on top of it. A fragrant scent began spreading throughout the cave. Lu Yi was busy setting up some wards deep within the cave when suddenly, Yi appeared from the ground and reported in a soft voice, "I couldn't locate the observer." Lu Yi nodded. "That's to be expected. It's probably that ghost cultivator." He was referring to the ghost cultivator he had trounced yesterday, Jianghu. Not long after he bade Xia Qianqian goodbye and left the arcane glade, Lu Yi suddenly felt as if he was being watched from somewhere. It was a feeling he was very familiar with when he was at the Spirit Creek battlefield. It wasn't long before he became certain that it wasn't his paranoia talking. Someone really was following him in secret. Yi had left the cave earlier in hopes of tracking the person following Lu Yi in secret to no avail. Assuming that their tail was the fifth-order ghost cultivator Lu Yi had defeated earlier, then it was no wonder she couldn't find anything. Even Lu Yi could only spot him if he had activated insight, and the ghost cultivator happened to be close by. He should have known that Xia Qianqian's reward wasn't so easily received. At the very least, it looked like he had caught the attention of her enemies. Then again, he had defeated two fifth-order cultivators as a third-order cultivator, not to mention that the Jiang brothers were no ordinary fifth-order cultivators. They were both capable of defeating enemies higher than their cultivation level in their own right. Of course he had drawn their attention. Unfortunately, there was no way Lu Yi could have hidden his strength. His cultivation level was 2 minor realms below his opponent's, but Jiang Liuzi was a sword cultivator as well. It would be suicidal to hide his strength against an opponent that powerful. Rather than risking his life, he would rather end the fight as soon as possible. At least this way he wouldn't be showing off too many of his cards. Lu Yi could have sped up and shaken off his tail upon noticing him, but that would make it crystal clear that he knew he was being followed. There were better ways to achieve the same outcome. For starters, he could turn around and give the ghost cultivator the scare of his life. But that would be a bad idea at the moment because he was sure that the ghost cultivator wasn't operating alone. That ninth-order young man had seemed extremely interested in him, and he wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that he was the one who set the ghost cultivator on him. Obviously Lu Yi was no match for him. A while later, Lu Yi left the cave and took to the skies once more. In the darkness, Jiang Qingzi watched Lu Ye's departing figure with a puzzled expression. As Lu Yi had theorized, the person following him was none other than the ghost cultivator, Jiang Qingzi. Not only that, he was right in guessing that the ninth-order young man was the one who instigated Jiang Qingzi to follow him in secret. Jiang Qingzi couldn't figure out why Lu Yi had suddenly decided to take off when it was the perfect time to catch some rest. Regardless, he hurriedly sent his companions a message before chasing after Lu Yi once more. An hour later, Lu Yi landed about 50 kilometers away from his previous location and walked into another cave. In the darkness, Jiang Qingzi also descended on the ground before sending another message. Tens of kilometers away, the ninth-order young man and Jiang Liuzi could be seen flying toward Lu Ye's latest location. They hadn't dared to get too close because they didn't want to warn Lu Yi of their suspicious activities. If Lu Yi found out that they were tracking him, he would surely summon Xia Qianqian to his aid. The situation would become complicated if that happened. Jiang Liuzi looked much better after a full day's rest. While following behind the young man, he voiced his puzzlement. "Senior Brother Wei, who is that fox face? Why do you care so much about him?" Fox Face was unimaginably powerful, and Jiang Liuzi was sure that he was a famous cultivator. However, that didn't explain Wei Kei's obsession with the man. Wei Kei was soon to ascend to the real lake realm after all. There shouldn't be many things left in the Cloud River battlefield that could catch his attention. Wei Kei asked, "Have you heard of the Crimson Blood sect?" "Of course I have." Who hadn't heard of the Crimson Blood sect of Bingzhou? 30 years ago they were the strongest sect of the Grand Sky Coalition. "Have you heard of Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect then?" Jiang Liuzi exclaimed in surprise. "You're saying that Foxface is that man?" "So, you have heard of him," Wei Kei commented with an approving smile. It wasn't difficult to find out Lu Ye's identity. All he needed to do was to find who stood out in the Spirit Creek battlefield in the last half a year or so, and who among them was a saber-wielding combat cultivator. Wei Kei had sent the message immediately after he left with his people. At first he didn't suspect anything. He was just curious about Lu Yi and wanted to know the mysterious young man better. Suffice to say, his mind was blown when he found out his true identity. Liu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect was the most wanted man by the Thousand Demon Ridge bar none in the past half a year or so. The combined bounty on his head was enough to make even a ninth-order Cloud River Realm cultivator like him turn green with greed. To give an example, he would never have to worry about cultivation resources for the rest of his life if he could kill Liu Yi. As a member of the Thousand Demon Ridge, there was no way Wei Kei could say no to the temptation. That was why he immediately ordered Jiang Qingzi to keep an eye on the arcane glade. Once Liu Yi left the arcane glade, Jiang Qingzi immediately chased after the young man from afar. Wei Kei wasn't surprised that Jiang Liuzi had heard of Liu Yi. It was because the sword cultivator was still at the Spirit Creek battlefield when the legendary Battle of Golden Tip broke out. However, the Jiang brothers were heaven-grade 9th-order cultivators, and Liu Yi was just a 5th-order cultivator at the time. Astounded as they were at the news, they did not think much of Liu Yi at all. At the time, Liu Yi still wasn't strong enough to pose a threat against the Thousand Demon Ridge. 2 months after the Battle of Golden Tip, the Jiang brothers ascended to the Cloud River realm. They had not left the Cloud River battlefield since. Naturally, they had almost no idea about the waves Liu Yi had caused not just in the Spirit Creek battlefield, but in Jianghu as well. That said, Jiang Liuzi was aware that the sects of the Thousand Demon Ridge had come together to put an unbelievable bounty on Liu Ye's head. It was because of that bounty that thousands of cultivators had gathered at the Golden Tip and became Liu Ye's first stepping stone to legendary status. Are you sure it's him? Just how fast does he cultivate? Jiang Liuzi was stunned because it had only been a year or two since the Battle of Golden Tip. This meant that Liu Yi had become a Cloud River Realm cultivator in that short amount of time. Not only that, the young man was a 3rd-order Cloud River Realm cultivator already. He and his brother had entered the Cloud River battlefield at least a year earlier than Liu Yi, but the young man had almost caught up to their cultivation level already. If only his cultivation speed is his only merit. I bet you and your brother have no idea what he did on the Spirit Creek battlefield, have you? Wei Kei shook his head. To be honest, he himself was shocked when he received the detailed information on Liu Yi. The 2 years Liu Yi spent on the Spirit Creek battlefield were easily some of the worst years the Thousand Demon Ridge had suffered since the day of their founding. This was especially true during the 2nd year where Liu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect came to rule over the Spirit Creek battlefield as its one and only overlord. Wherever he went, the sects of the Thousand Demon Ridge quaked in their boots. Even Tier 1 sects were unable to stop him in his tracks. In the end, the Thousand Demon Ridge had no choice but to pay him a hefty ransom to buy their safety. It was even said that the Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators cheered like it was New Year when the monster finally ascended to the Cloud River realm. Suffice to say, no cultivator had ever managed to trigger such a reaction from an entire faction until Liu Yi. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, his legend would probably be remembered for at least the next 1 or 2 decades to come. Jiang Liuzi could not help his curiosity. What on earth did Liu Yi do in the Spirit Creek battlefield? For a moment, Wei Kei did not say anything. A while later, he finally let out a sigh and gave Jiang Liuzi a summary. The summary was brief, but the sword cultivator's face still burned with shame when he heard it. If he could travel back in time and warn his past self to refrain from asking about the details, he would. To say that Liu Yi had wiped the floor with his faction in the Spirit Creek battlefield would be an understatement. The second-hand embarrassment alone was almost enough to make him consider defecting to the Grand Sky Coalition. That is why every top-tier sect had increased the bounty on his head after he ascended to the Cloud River realm. They were hoping that we could locate the bastard and eliminate him before he became too strong to handle. Unfortunately, you know how the Cloud River battlefield is, not to mention that it has only been a while since Liu Yi got here. No one has managed to locate him, until now. Liu Yi had already displayed a monstrous amount of talent when he was still a Spirit Creek realm cultivator, and he would only become even more monstrous as time passed. Naturally, the Thousand Demon Ridge wanted him gone as soon as possible. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, there was literally no one who was a match for him. That was no longer the case. Here in the Cloud River battlefield, the Thousand Demon Ridge had a real chance at ending him once and for all. However, communication between Jianghu and the Cloud River battlefield was much more inconvenient than the Spirit Creek battlefield. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, the legate could just communicate with their Keeper of Seal through the battlefield imprint. This convenience was not available in the Cloud River battlefield. Not only did someone have to physically enter the Cloud River battlefield to pass on the message, they had to stay there for an entire month before they were allowed to leave. It was the rule the heavens had set, and no one could circumvent it. As a result, Cloud River Realm cultivators did not have a convenient way of trading information in and out of the Cloud River battlefield. Take Wei Kei for example. If Lu Yi hadn't displayed an unbelievable amount of talent during the fight, he would not have made the inquiry. He would never hear of the young man until he ascended to the real Lake Realm and returned to Jianghu. Lu Yi would be shedding tears of fury if he knew about this. Before he wore his disguise, he had been able to strut about without being recognized by any Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator. But after he put on the fox mask, his enemy had dug out practically everything there was to know about him except the color of his underwear. How ironic was that? Chapter 497 He's gone? Jiang Liuzi asked with a frown. When did he enter the Cloud River battlefield? I'm not sure about the exact date, but according to the intel I received, it hasn't even been 2 months since he ascended to the Cloud River realm. Jiang Liuzi gasped audibly when he heard this. The time one ascended to the Cloud River realm was usually the time they entered the Cloud River battlefield as well. At most, they would take a short break before departing for the Cloud River battlefield. However, Lu Yi was already a third-order cultivator. Was it even possible to cultivate that fast? While it was true that a cultivator was expected to shoot through the cultivation levels at the Cloud River realm thanks to the miraculous cultivation resources that were amulets, it wasn't actually easy to acquire them. Even if someone was lucky enough to stumble upon a Token of Providence event, they would have to compete against hundreds, if not thousands of people to obtain maybe 1 or 2 amulets. It was also practically impossible to obtain an amulet that was above 1 station, so to speak. For example, purple and gold amulets were generally obtained by 8th and 9th order cultivators. If Jiang Liuzi, a mere 5th order cultivator, tried to lay his hands on something that valuable, his betters would not hesitate to teach him some humility. With that in mind, just how many amulets did Lu Yi obtain to make it to the 3rd order already? He could scarcely imagine. There were few things more hurtful than comparison. For the longest time, Jiang Liuzi believed his cultivation speed was better than most, and he still did. However, he was practically trash compared to Lu Yi. Suddenly Wei Kei said, "We're here." When they descended to the ground, Jiang Qingzi emerged from the darkness and welcomed them. "Is he still there?" Wei Kei asked. "Yes. He's been hiding inside that cave this whole time," Jiang Qingzi reported while pointing at the cave Lu Yi had entered earlier. "Wonderful." Wei Kei's smile widened as he instructed, "Jiang Qingzi, head inside and ambush Lu Yi. If you succeed, then all is well. If you fail, then Jiang Liuzi and I will kill him. When it is over, 60% of the bounty will go to me and 40% to you both." Wei Kei was asking a lot here, but he was a 9th order cultivator. He had the right and power to make such a demand, so Jiang Liuzi simply accepted the arrangement. Jiang Qingzi still didn't know who Lu Yi was, so he didn't really understand what Wei Kei was saying. Did that bastard have a bounty on his head? In any case, if his brother had nothing to say about the arrangement, then he was okay with it as well. "I'm going in," Jiang Qingzi said before grabbing a pitch-black dagger with his right hand and turning invisible. He then slowly made his way toward the cave. During the earlier battle, Lu Yi had knocked him out of concealment almost immediately and beaten the crap out of him. Naturally, Jiang Qingzi was displeased with the outcome. Even now, he still thought that Lu Yi had just gotten lucky. Of course he, a ghost cultivator, was going to lose against a combat cultivator in close combat. In his mind, he swore to undo the damage that had been done to his pride. This time he would teach Foxface the true terror of a ghost cultivator. Wei Kei and Jiang Liuzi got into position after Wei Qingzi vanished. They were ready to assist the ghost cultivator in case anything happened. For a while nothing happened at all. Then, a massive explosion erupted from the cave, and a giant tongue of flame shot out of the cave entrance. This sudden turn of events caught both Wei Kei and Jiang Liuzi by surprise. A ghost cultivator's assassination was supposed to be silent, right? So what was with this explosion? Wait, that's not right. No. Jiang Liuzi let out a cry of alarm before flying straight toward the cave. Wei Kei also followed behind him with a frown. A while later, Jiang Liuzi dug out Jiang Qingzi from under a pile of rubble. The ghost cultivator was covered in blood, soot and ash, and every strand of his hair was standing on end. He looked absolutely terrible to say the least. The only silver lining was that he wasn't dead. What the hell happened? Where is Lu Yi? Wei Kei asked. The cave had collapsed, but Wei Kei could tell with his senses that Lu Yi was nowhere to be seen. Jiang Qingzi panted heavily with a frightened expression. "I didn't see him when I went inside. What I can tell you was that I was nearly killed by a heaven's damned explosive ward." He thought this was the moment he would redeem himself, but he had barely set foot in the cave when the explosive ward triggered and nearly killed him. While most ghost cultivators possessed excellent speed, the cave was exceptionally small and narrow. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to escape the cave in time before the explosive ward triggered and buried him beneath a pile of rubble. As for the heavens-damned foxface who was surely behind the ward, he hadn't seen the man at all. "I thought you said he was inside?" Wei Kei asked with an ugly expression. He just vanished somehow." Jiang Qingzi defended himself. He had seen Foxface entering the cave with his own eyes, and he never saw him leaving through the entrance. There was no denying the fact that the bastard had vanished like a ghost though. Looking at all the evidence, Lu Yi must have noticed that someone was following him in secret. That was why he had set up an ambush in the cave before sneaking away using a concealment talisman paper or something. Wei Kei's expression was grim to say the least. He thought this would be easy, but not only had they fallen for their prey's trickery, they didn't even know where he was right now. The Cloud River battlefield was a massive place. If Lu Yi truly set his mind to hide, who could possibly dig him out of his hidey hole? If he could spread the message that Lu Yi was here and mobilize every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator to action, then sure, the young man would be cornered eventually. However, the Cloud River battlefield was a much more complicated place than the Spirit Creek battlefield, not to mention that he wasn't willing to share the bounty with too many people. He was a ninth-order cultivator. If he could locate Lu Yi, he had a 100% chance of killing the young man no matter how exceptional he was. The only reason he even brought the Jiang brothers with him was because of Jiang Qingzi. He didn't have a realistic way to follow Lu Yi without being detected, so he needed the ghost cultivator to do the tracking. Unfortunately, Lu Yi still managed to detect Jiang Qingzi. He even set up a trap for the poor bastard and nearly killed him. It wasn't a fluke after all. Just how strong is his perception to detect a fifth-order ghost cultivator who was 2 minor realms above him? "Let's split up." There is no way he could have gone far. Wei Kei ordered before leaping into the air, leaving behind the 2 dumbfounded Jiang brothers. He wasn't worried that the Jiang brothers would hide Lu Yi's location from him if they located him first. They should know from the earlier battle that Lu Yi was not someone they could kill in short order, and that he was the only one in their group who could realistically kill the combat cultivator. On the other hand, he could claim the full share of the bounty if he located Lu Yi first. The only thing that worried him was the Jiang brothers notifying their sects about Lu Yi's appearance. Since their sects were Tier 2 sects, it was inevitable that some Cloud River realm experts would be mobilized to join in the search. There was nothing he could do to stop this though, so he didn't even bother to try. Who on earth is Foxface anyway? Why does senior brother Wei care about him so much? Jiang Qingzi asked after Wei Kei's departure. "He is Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect. I feel like I've heard that name from somewhere. He's the guy who fought in the Battle of Golden Tip," Jiang Liuzi reminded his brother. "Oh. I still remember the insane bounty on that guy's head to this day. Now you get why Wei Kei cares so much about him." Jiang Qingzi's wounds suddenly didn't feel that painful anymore. "What are we waiting for then? Let's search for that bastard already." After we message senior brother Lu Shu and the others, Wei Kei wants to claim all the bounty for himself. We should give him a run for his money, don't you agree? Although they all belonged to the Thousand Demon Ridge, and they definitely stood united when the greater good was on the line, it was inevitable that they would succumb to their baser nature in all other matters. That was just how humanity was. It wasn't long before more people learned that Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect had been spotted in the Cloud River battlefield. Most 8th and 9th order cultivators had never heard of Lu Yi because they rarely left the Cloud River battlefield, but after Jiang Liuzi shared with them everything he knew about the combat cultivator, they were tempted by the ludicrous bounty on his head if nothing else. It was literally the opportunity of a lifetime. They rushed toward Lu Ye's last known location immediately for fear that someone else would kill the young man before them. Meanwhile, Lu Yi was sitting inside a cave and enjoying his barbecued meat. It was none other than the first cave he entered after leaving the arcane glade. So, how did he cross over from the second cave without being detected or caught by the enemy? By using a teleportation ward, of course. Earlier, he had set up a master ward in the first cave before flying to the second cave. After flying 50 kilometers to the second cave, he set up a sub-ward and an explosive ward before teleporting back to the first cave. He hadn't seen Jiang Qingzi entering the second cave and triggering the explosive ward, but he was sure that his enemies would attempt to infiltrate it eventually. When that happened, the explosive ward would trigger and destroy everything within. The ghost cultivator might survive, but his sub-ward definitely would not. They would never know that he had teleported back to the first cave using a teleportation ward. Coincidentally, he had returned just in time to avoid overcooking his meat. He had been enjoying his dinner since. It had been a long time since Lu Yi used a teleportation ward. To his surprise, the experience did not feel nearly as bad as his initial experiments. The connection between the master ward and the sub-ward were much stronger. Obviously, it was because his cultivation level was much higher than before. When he first set up the teleportation wards, he was only a Heaven 7 cultivator. At his current level, he should be able to create teleportation wards with a longer teleportation range. This was great news, of course. The farther a teleportation ward could teleport something or someone, the better it was. Lu Yi did not stay in the cave for long. He left as soon as he collected his ward flags. He was still holding his barbecued meat when he took to the sky. Lu Yi wanted to be as far away from the cave as possible because a 50-kilometer distance was nothing to a Cloud River Realm cultivator. His trackers might have a lot of ground to cover, but given enough time and numbers, it was only a matter of time before they made it back to the first cave. They would discover if he took too long. The night was pitch black tonight. Even with his superior vision, he was unable to spot even a single star in the sky. Lu Yi did not stop flying in the opposite direction of the second cave until dawn broke, crossing at least 1,000 kilometers before descending on a random riverside in the wilderness. Both him and Amber were dusty from the journey, so they took a bath before finding a secluded spot to hide. He then set up a couple of wards before taking a moment to tidy his stuff. After he recovered his mental strength and spiritual power, Lu Yi finally took out a purple amulet and crushed it between his fingers. It was the one he had drawn using the amulet casket Xia Qianqian gave him. There was nothing a Cloud River Realm cultivator loved more than an amulet. He saw no reason to delay using it, especially in light of recent events. Chapter 498, Carnage Colosseum. Several hours later, when the purple vortex pouring out the spirit mist had disappeared, Lu Yi checked his river of spiritual power and noted that it was bigger than before. However, he was nowhere close to ascending to the fourth order. When he left the Myriad Beast domain, he had spent nearly 30,000 battle points to buy enough amulets to boost him all the way to the third order. Not only that, he was well on his way to the fourth order. Unfortunately, the greater one's cultivation was, the more cultivation resources they had to consume to get to the next level. Assuming his rough calculations were correct, he probably needed only 1 gold amulet to ascend from the first to the second order, 2 gold amulets to ascend from the second order to the third order, and 4 gold amulets to ascend from the third order to the fourth order. Naturally, his need would only increase over time. This was why a single purple amulet was nowhere near enough to boost him into the fourth order despite his good progress. Lu Yi was okay with this though. It hadn't even been 2 months since entered the Cloud River battlefield, and he was already a third order cultivator. He dared not say that his cultivation speed was unprecedented, nor would he claim that no one would ever surpass him in the future. However, he had to be one of the fastest growing Cloud River Realm cultivators in the history of Jianghu. Knowing that, it would be plain hubris to expect more from himself. Lu Yi was just about to take his leave when suddenly, he felt a strange buzz from all around him. At the same time, the world itself seemed to darken unnaturally. Lu Yi immediately grabbed the inviolable while observing his surroundings carefully. Before he could identify what was happening though, he saw a bright light rising into the sky like a new star from far, far away. This alone would be cause for alarm, but the fact that the light was blood red in color worried Lu Yi even more. The red light would continue to brighten in intensity as it climbed higher into the sky. Right now, anyone within a few 100,000 kilometers of the light could probably see it. Lu Yi frowned at the ominous-looking red light while going through all the intel he had bought from the Divine Trade Association since arriving at the Cloud River battlefield. He did not know what the red light was, but it could only be an act of the heavens. Cloud River Realm cultivators did not have the ability to cause such a huge scene. A few seconds later, he recalled something and suddenly turned as white as a sheet. Without hesitation, he constructed soar and shot into the sky like a shooting star. Not only that, he even boosted his speed further with Windwalk, going from 0 to 200 in an instant. Lu Yi generally avoided using soar with Windwalk because the 2 glyphs cost an ungodly amount of spiritual power to maintain, but this time he didn't try to conserve his energy at all. He escaped like an ancient beast of legend was mere seconds away from devouring him whole. What's wrong, Lu Yi? Yi voiced her concerns from inside Amber. She did not understand why Lu Yi was acting like he was being chased by the enemy. She tried spreading out her senses but could not sense anyone close to them. I'll explain to you later, Lu Yi replied in a hurry. There was no time to even explain things to Yi. If the red light really was what he thought it was, then there was no time to waste. To the strong, the red light represented great opportunities and rewards. But to a puny third-order cultivator like him, it was more like the Grim Reaper himself. He had to get out of range before it was too late. Lu Yi would continue to fly like he was being hunted while the bright red star hung in the sky for an incense stick or so. Then, it suddenly exploded into a smattering of light beams. From a distance, the scattering light beams looked like a ridiculously huge meteor shower. Each beam was ridiculously huge as well. Lu Yi managed to cover between 100 to 150 kilometers of distance during the short period where the red star was idle, but Yi suddenly cried out in alarm, "Watch out!" His pupils constricted when one of the light beams suddenly cut through his vision and landed right in front of him. The next moment, it transformed into a massive screen of light. Lu Yi knew this was going to be bad, but there was no time to slow down. He just barely managed to cross his arms in front of him and turned on his side before he slammed hip first into the light screen. There was a loud bang as Lu Yi crashed full force into the light screen. The light screen did not budge in the slightest, but the combat cultivator was bounced away like a ball. He hit the ground so hard that he was dizzy and incapacitated for a few seconds. There wasn't a part of his body that didn't hurt like hell. After he managed to climb back to his feet, Lu Yi glared at the red screen in front of him with a complicated expression on his face. In the end, he didn't manage to escape. It definitely wasn't due to a lack of trying though. The light beam had landed in front of him and blocked his path right as he was about to make his escape. He could not believe that it was just a coincidence. A bird's-eye view of this region would reveal that the red screen resembled an upside-down bowl that contained everything within hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and as Lu Yi had just proven with his own body, no one was allowed to leave its boundaries until the event taking place inside the red screen was over. Well shit. I guess our plans to find Zhu Jia will have to be postponed to a later date. Yi emerged from Amber's body and stared at the massive light screen in front of her with a stunned expression. She could see countless thin light strands circulating within the light screen like blood. Its very existence seemed to scream murder and carnage. What on earth is going on, Lu Yi? The Carnage Colosseum. We're trapped inside the Carnage Colosseum right now. Lu Yi shared the intel he had purchased from the Divine Trade Association with Yi after answering her question because the event was a little too complicated to explain verbally. While the young girl was checking the contents of the jade slip, Lu Yi observed his surroundings and confirmed once again that they were definitely trapped within the Carnage Colosseum. Frankly, this was one of the last events he expected to encounter in the Cloud River battlefield, or at least not as a third-order cultivator. The Carnage Colosseum was a random event that could only be encountered in the Cloud River battlefield. Every time it appeared, an area of land would be enveloped in a screen of red light. The size of the affected region wasn't always the same, and it was very difficult to predict when it would happen. Sometimes it only occurred once every year or two. Sometimes it occurred multiple times in a single year. The location of the Carnage Colosseum was also completely random. The one constant of this event was the blood-red screen. Anyone could pass through the red screen and enter the region after it appeared, but they wouldn't be able to leave until the event was over. Judging from the size of the red screen, this was definitely a large-scale event. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers of land was huge even for a Cloud River realm cultivator. Of course, it was nothing compared to the entire Cloud River battlefield. Obviously, the Carnage Colosseum was given its name because it involved a lot of violence and carnage. Usually, unfamiliar Cloud River realm cultivators rarely got into conflict with one another. It was because they didn't know the other person's affiliation. It was a different story in the Carnage Colosseum, however. A cultivator's affiliation was automatically revealed as soon as they got within a certain range of another cultivator. In this sense, it was a bit similar to how the battlefield imprints lit up on their own when a sect fought against another sect. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, a cultivator's battlefield imprint would automatically light up if a war was declared between two sects, and they were close to a member of the opposing faction. It was so that unfamiliar cultivators wouldn't accidentally kill their own allies. So far, Lu Yi had not killed more than a handful of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators since he entered the Cloud River battlefield. It wasn't because his nature had changed, but because he simply did not have the chance to do so. Conflict rarely happened between two unfamiliar cultivators unless they knew for certain that the other person belonged to an opposing faction. It was different in the Carnage Colosseum, however. If two cultivators were close enough to one another, then their affiliation would automatically be revealed. If they belonged to the same faction, then all was well. If not, then of course they were going to murder the crap out of each other. This was doubly true if one cultivator was drastically stronger than the other. This was why Lu Yi had tried to escape as soon as he discovered the truth. Even if he was used to overcoming enemies who were multiple minor realms above his cultivation level, he was just a third-order cultivator. If he ran into an 8th or 9th order enemy, forget killing them, he might not even be able to escape their wrath. Simply put, he was still too weak to participate in a dangerous event like the Carnage Colosseum. Unfortunately, he ultimately did not make it out of the Carnage Colosseum. In fact, he strongly suspected that the heavens were fucking with him. He was literally a few steps away from freedom when the light screen just happened to block his way. He had no doubt that the heavens were behind the Carnage Colosseum. He wouldn't even be surprised if someone told him that the heavens had specifically created it to test the cultivators of Jianghu. At the beginning of his cultivation journey, he had believed that the heavens were an ephemeral existence that rarely interfered with a cultivator's life. However, he came to notice the opposite as his horizons broadened. The Carnage Colosseum was a bloody and dangerous place, but the rewards it offered were just as great. For starters, a Token of Providence event almost always occurred in the Carnage Colosseum. There was a high chance it would manifest a gold amulet as well. It was common knowledge that the Token of Providence event rarely produced gold amulets. For example, the iridescent cloud Lu Yi had encountered during his first day in the Cloud River battlefield was just a tetrachromatic cloud that produced a purple amulet at best. A dichromatic cloud would produce a green amulet at best, a trichromatic cloud would produce a blue amulet at best, and a pentachromatic cloud would produce a gold amulet at best. Not only that, a roster of the Carnage Colosseum was generated for every instance of the Carnage Colosseum. It was similar to the Scroll of Supremacy in the sense that the top 100 performers of the event would be listed on the ranking list. Lu Yi would guess that they were rewarded based on how well they placed on the roster of the Carnage Colosseum as well, but he didn't know for sure because it wasn't mentioned in the intel he bought from the Divine Trade Association. Not only that, the heavens would bestow someone in the Carnage Colosseum a gold amulet every day. Some people might think that this was a wonderful thing, and it was, but only if the chosen cultivator's cultivation level was high enough. Otherwise it was just an absolute nightmare. Usually, an amulet could be used anytime, anywhere. However, this particular gold amulet could not be used or even stored inside a storage bag until the chosen cultivator had held it for 24 hours. Only then could it be used or stored like a normal gold amulet. To put it simply, the cultivator who was bestowed a gold amulet must somehow protect the amulet for 24 hours straight. Of course, this still wasn't too big of a hurdle to overcome. Theoretically speaking, the holder of the gold amulet simply needed to find a good hiding spot and stay there for 24 hours straight. If they happened to be a ghost cultivator, then even better. Chapter 499 Who on earth were these people? The problem was that the special gold amulet would light up like a beacon once every 6 hours during the 24-hour period. It did not matter how well the holder of the amulet hid. Their location would be revealed immediately. This type of amulet was usually hotly contested by countless elites. After all, it was completely up to luck what kind of amulet one might obtain from a Token of Providence event, but the special amulet bestowed upon the receiver was guaranteed to be a gold amulet. Assuming that one's cultivation level was high enough, it was perfectly possible to snatch it from the receiver's hands and claim it as their own. Lu Yi remained calm as he recalled everything he knew about the Carnage Colosseum. Since he failed to escape the Carnage Colosseum before it was too late, the next best action was to do everything in his power to ensure his survival. A large number of cultivators was guaranteed to arrive at the Carnage Colosseum in the next few days. This was especially true for high-level cultivators like Xia Chanshan or Wei Quebec. While the Carnage Colosseum was more dangerous than rewarding to Lu Yi, it was the opposite for high-level cultivators. There was no way they would allow this opportunity to slip through their grasp. Lu Yi was okay with getting nothing from this Carnage Colosseum. All he wanted was to survive until the end of the event. Although his cultivation level was weak, his ability to survive was way stronger than another cultivator at the same cultivation level. For starters, he could conceal himself using invisibility and conceal presence. Soar and Windwalk guaranteed that he could escape all but the strongest cultivators. This wasn't enough, however. Lu Yi knew that he would need to make a lot more preparations to be truly secure. A plan quickly took form in his mind even as he thanked his past self for having the foresight to create a ton of ward flags in preparation for the future. Otherwise he would feel so much more insecure right now. There was a Divine Trade Association hotspot within the Carnage Colosseum. The red screen encompassed an entire region of hundreds of thousands of kilometers after all. However, the hotspot would shut down its business and remain closed until the event was over. This meant that he could not enter the hotspot and seek shelter until the event was over, much less trade with them. It was a rule set by the heavens themselves. Lu Yi had prepared a sufficient amount of spirit stones, spirit pills, ward flags and ward keystones beforehand. As long as he was careful, he should be able to survive until the end of the Carnage Colosseum without any issues. Generally speaking, the event should last a month at most. Looking back, most Carnage Colosseums lasted between half a month to a month, though it was impossible to predict how long the event would last before it was actually over. Also, the heavens always gave out a signal right before the event was about to end. Lu Yi was still thinking when the red screen next to him suddenly distorted unnaturally. The next thing he knew, a man stepped right out of it. Clearly, the newcomer was someone who was looking to participate in the Carnage Colosseum. Since the red screen was completely opaque, the newcomer did not see Lu Yi until it was too late and vice versa. As their eyes met, the battlefield imprint on the back of Lu Yi's hand abruptly shone blue without warning. At the same time, the battlefield imprint on the back of the newcomer's hand shone red. He's a 1000-demon ridge cultivator. Judging from his size and vitality, he was a body-tempering cultivator too. Anyone who dared to enter the Carnage Colosseum alone could not be weak, and anyone who was too weak would not dare to enter the Carnage Colosseum without good reason. It would be suicide otherwise. There was a brief standoff as the body-tempering cultivator glanced back and forth between Lu Yi and Yi. He then said solemnly, "I'm just passing through." Although Lu Yi belonged to the opposing faction, the body-tempering cultivator figured that it would be folly to engage him without figuring out his cultivation level first, not to mention that he was outnumbered 2-1. The body-tempering cultivator nodded and began stepping away after expressing his intention. Lu Yi simply watched him with a blank expression. Yi remained motionless as well. The body-tempering cultivator was about 50 meters away when he suddenly stopped in his tracks and asked, "You two were trying to leave, weren't you?" The second he said this, Lu Yi immediately launched himself at the body-tempering cultivator like a cannonball. Yi also fired a golden arc straight at the man. The body-tempering cultivator abruptly spun around and crushed Yi's spell with his bare fist. His mouth split into an ugly, malicious grin. "I knew it." The body-tempering cultivator hadn't dared to attack Lu Yi and Yi at the beginning because he didn't know what their cultivation levels were. That was why he claimed he was just passing through and pretended to leave. If Lu Yi and Yi were powerful cultivators, then there was no way they would let him go without a fight. On the other hand, they could not be too strong if they simply watched him leave without trying anything. Moreover, the duo were standing at the edge of the Carnage Colosseum and facing toward the red screen. It was clear that they were hoping to leave the region. If they were powerful cultivators, they would not do this right at the start of the event. Anyone who was 5th order or even 4th order would not make such a choice. That was why the body-tempering cultivator grew certain that Lu Yi and Yi were newbies. They were at best 3rd order cultivators, and they had to know nothing about the Carnage Colosseum at all. Otherwise, they would know that it was impossible to pass through the red screen. The only way to leave was to wait until the event was over. He took action as soon as he made up his mind. He grew even more certain in his hypotheses when Yi and Lu Yi flared their spiritual power, revealing themselves to be a puny 1st order spell cultivator and a 3rd order combat cultivator. He would be remiss to allow such easy prey to slip through his grasp. The body-tempering cultivator was so confident in his abilities that he didn't even bring out his shield spirit artifact. The fact was that he had crushed Yi's spell in one punch. Suddenly, the body-tempering cultivator's grin froze on his face. Then he abruptly threw a punch at the combat cultivator and jumped away from him at the same time. Unfortunately, he was a little too slow to dodge the strike that was aimed at his abdomen. When he looked down, he saw that the strike had left a massive gash in his stomach. He could hardly believe his eyes. Did a 3rd order combat cultivator really just disembowel him? He was a 5th order body-tempering cultivator. His physique was so strong that even a 5th order combat cultivator would be hard-pressed to leave such a tremendous wound on his body. And yet, the 3rd order combat cultivator before his eyes had completely overturned his common sense. The reason he hadn't brought out his shield spirit artifact at the beginning was because he was confident that he would win. Now that confidence had been stomped into smithereens. Another spell hit him before he could think of a solution. A 1st order spell cultivator should not be able to cast this quickly. These two, they're not ordinary Cloud River Realm cultivators. The combat cultivator especially must have entered the Scroll of Supremacy before. The thought flashed across his mind as he hurriedly brought out his shield spirit artifact to block Yi's spells. However, he sensed a burst of killing intent from behind him. The combat cultivator had somehow taken his flank without him noticing. He's ridiculously fast for a third-order cultivator. The body-tempering cultivator hurriedly spun around and just barely blocked Lu Ye's thrust with his shield spirit artifact. His shield arm turned numb from the sheer amount of force that was transmitted through his shield. He's ridiculously strong for a third-order cultivator as well. The body-tempering cultivator was really starting to regret his latest life choice. Just who on earth were these people? They were way stronger than they had any right to be considering their cultivation level. He pushed Lu Ye's saber away with one hand before summoning what looked like a mace to the other hand. Then he brought it down on Lu Ye's head with great force. The spell cultivator was blasting away at his back like a repeating crossbow, but he couldn't afford to pay her any attention right now. He could only channel his spiritual power and vitality to block her spells. Bang bang bang. Although the body-tempering cultivator was extremely durable, it still hurt him to endure a continuous barrage of spells head-on. The good news was that he was 4 minor realms above the spell cultivator. His back might look awful from a bystander's perspective, but the damage was superficial at best, especially since he was a body-tempering cultivator. On the other hand, Lu Yi posed a far greater threat than Yi. As his vitality became mingled with ambers, he channeled a good amount of it into his right arm before swinging his saber upward. When the blow connected, the body-tempering cultivator's eyeballs nearly fell out of his sockets. It was because the blow was so strong that he nearly lost his grip on his shield spirit artifact. As his shield and his arms were flung over his shoulders, his front was completely exposed. Lu Yi had already withdrawn his saber and assumed a stabbing stance. Every hair on the body-tempering cultivator's body stood on end as he tried to respond to the attack. Unfortunately, he just wasn't fast enough to keep up with the combat cultivator. He had just caught himself when the saber flew toward his abdomen. Goosebumps erupted all across his body as he cycled his spiritual power to the limit and attempted to bring his shield spirit artifact in front of the saber. He had already taken enough hits to know just how terrifyingly powerful the combat cultivator wearing a fox mask was. If he failed to block the attack in time, the combat cultivator was going to skewer him like an animal. It looked like he would make it in time when suddenly, the white spirit beast on the combat cultivator's shoulder suddenly let out a thunderous roar. Shockwaves visibly washed over his body and made him feel like someone had cracked open his skull and hit his brain with an invisible hammer. His movement paused for only an instant, but that was all it took to seal his fate. Lu Ye's saber brushed against the edge of the body-tempering cultivator's shield spirit artifact and pierced right through his stomach. Without pause, he activated Burster and caused 1,000,000 energy spikes to burst out of the blade. A painful howl escaping his lips, the body-tempering cultivator pushed Lu Yi away and brought his mace down on his head. Lu Yi immediately withdrew his saber to defend himself, and the blow sent him skidding at least 30 meters away from the body-tempering cultivator and leaving a pair of trenches on the ground. Meanwhile, Yi was still blasting away at the body-tempering cultivator's back with impunity and knocking him off balance. It would not have been possible if not for the fact that his stomach was bleeding profusely, and his insides hurt so much that his face was distorted. He could sense that his death was near. It was because the combat cultivator's saber had somehow transformed into a deadly cactus inside his body and turned his internal organs into goo just now. As his life force ebbed away like crazy, he abruptly spun toward Yi and roared, "You are dead." He knew he wasn't going to walk away from this fight alive. However, that didn't mean he couldn't take at least one of his would-be killers down with him. The third-order combat cultivator was way too agile for him to catch even if he was at full strength. On the other hand, he only needed one hit to turn the first-order spell cultivator into fleshy mush if he could get close to her. Chapter 500, The Roster of Carnage. Yi stood her ground as the burly body-tempering cultivator charged headlong in her direction. Refusing to budge, she fired spell after spell. Each one hit her enemy's shield, eliciting bright, blinding flashes. One was matched with a disdainful smirk from the enemy body-tempering cultivator whose advance was not at all bogged down by her defiant attacks. Although that did not prevent the enemy from thinking, why the hell is this tiny female spell cultivator not running at all? Any other opponent weaker in both power and physical endurance would have long turned around to flee. Even if one were to stand and fight, they would at least prepare to duck. But why is she not doing anything at all? But there was no more time to think. The body-tempering cultivator was just meters away from Yi. Despair and despondency vanished from his eyes as he perished the thought of killing her. The sapling of hope for survival budded. He could catch her alive and use her to barter for his life. He thrust his shield forward like a battering ram. At the same time he was mindful enough to go soft. Too much force and he was afraid that he might kill her instead. But instead he felt nothing. The moment he expected resistance, there was none. The body-tempering cultivator's eyes went as wide as saucers with utter disbelief. Just when he was about to bash his shield into the frail and lithe figure of his opponent, she had sunken right through the ground and discorporated like water seeping into soil. What was that? What the hell just happened? As his mind misfired with chaos, the body-tempering cultivator could barely comprehend what in the world was going on. A living person who was still walking and talking had just vanished into the ground right before him. Yet the ground was still intact. There was no hole, no crater, or even a tunnel. Was it all just a bad dream or just his own hallucination? He could not make heads or tails of the female cultivator's disappearance, but he could not dwell on that mystery any longer. Something was coming for him from behind and it was closing in fast. He swiveled around frantically and the first thing that immediately reflected in his eyes was the scarlet luminescence that bristled the saber now falling down on his head. The body-tempering cultivator furiously lifted his shield. A clumsy clang of steel shook the shield violently enough for him to stagger backward. The wounds he incurred had practically halved his physical strength. But his opponent was already wheeling around for another exchange. The body-tempering cultivator mustered what remained of his strength and leaped to his feet. He needed to get out, pronto. Thinking of dragging another enemy down into the grave with him initially, his plan was foiled the moment his target had vanished. Therefore, the body-tempering cultivator was only bent on escaping. Dying for nothing now was the last thing he had in mind. Lu Yi stared as his opponent ascended into the air. The wooden weapons case hanging on his waist trembled as 9 sparks of light tore out in unison, just as he finished delivering the last of his 3 successive lightning-quick strikes. 3 luminous crescents screamed through the air, swarming around the body-tempering cultivator like an enveloping maneuver. Heavy thuds cascaded as the body-tempering cultivator's lumbering girth recoiled wildly as all 9 flying weapons pummeled at him from behind before the 3 crescent-shaped blasts slammed into him. Plummeting from 50 meters high, he crashed into a smoldering heap on the ground amid his agonizing screams. Discombobulated by the fall, he had only just regained his sight after seconds of disorienting sparkles blinding his vision when he saw a sly and triumphant grin staring down at him. Gripping his weapon, Lu Yi unfeelingly and mercilessly sank the steel of his weapon straight through his opponent. The tip skewered through his chest and came out his back. The body-tempering cultivator spasmed and stiffened. His hand groped for Lu Yi's face as if, in his final moments, he wished to at least see who it was who had killed him. But it was all for nothing. Lu Yi withdrew his weapon and deep claret ichor bubbled out of the wound. The dying cultivator's large hands drooped lifelessly back down as the final glimmers of life in his eyes gradually ebbed away. A speck of red glow flew up from the dead body and into Lu Yi's hand. He bent down to collect the dead man's spirit artifacts and removed his storage bag. After making sure that he did not miss any of the loot, he waved at EE, "Let's go." They had stayed longer than they had supposed to hear. News of the Carnage Colosseum's emergence must have reached the ears of those who were around, and anyone entering the Colosseum would surely pass by these areas, the Colosseum's outer periphery. To top it off, those who possessed the confidence and courage to step into the Carnage Colosseum at this moment were those with utmost assurance of their abilities. Meeting such opponents would only spell trouble if not doom. To say nothing of champions and elites who were already inside the Colosseum in the first place. They would be rushing to the outer periphery at this time so that they could intercept any cultivators from opposing factions and eliminate them to ensure an early advantage. Therefore, for a cultivator of middling abilities like Lu Yi, he needed to get out of this place as soon as possible in the early hours of the Carnage Colosseum's opening. By his reckoning, this place would be the site of a massive bloodbath that he expected to last at least 3 days. Yi vanished back into amber as Lu Yi sped forward with the tiger. The latter did not choose to fly. Running on foot might be slower than flying, but the difference in speed was not far off thanks to glyph, windwalk. As they sped ahead, Lu Yi spied something bright streaking across the sky. He halted. He looked up and saw a pennant unfurling in midair, pulsing with a morbid red sheen that rippled across the banner like mysterious object like blood. The size of the pennant was enough for every cultivator within a radius of tens of thousands of miles, the entirety of the Carnage Colosseum grounds, to see it clearly the moment they looked up. The blood-red banner snapped in the high winds. Lu Yi was wondering what its purpose was before the enigma was cracked soon enough. That's the roster of the Carnage Colosseum. The roster of Carnage. A sense of foreboding dread crept into him. He had just killed a Cloud River Realm 5th Order. That body-tempering cultivator that he had just slain. His rank was higher than that of Lu Yi's. The gigantic pennant that was the roster of Carnage fluttered. Rows of golden inscriptions magically appeared as if an invisible hand was doing the writing. 3 columns, names, Carnage points, rewards rolled down. The names were all listed according to rank. The first name at the top of the list would be the name of the leading contestant of this round. The present ranking list were as follows: Lu Yi, 120 points, a Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification and 9 golden amulets. Xiao Liang, 100 points, 9 golden amulets. Tang Ku, 80 points, 7 golden amulets. Yu Fuming, 50 points, 5 golden amulets. Tan Sheng, 45 points, 5 golden amulets. The corner of Lu Yi's eyelids throbbed as he read his own name chased in gold. That's his name. In first place. The most conspicuous spot on the blood list. He would have been less anxious if he were a strong and formidable cultivator without equal. His name could be at the first place of the roster of Carnage for all he cared, and he wouldn't even blink an eye. But right here, right now, the fact remained that he was just a Cloud River Realm 3rd Order. Having his name at the top of the list was no different from forcing him to walk the plank. Every single cultivator now inside the Carnage Colosseum would see and remember his name. If there was any reason for relief, that would be the fact that the roster did not include the names of the various sects and orders the contestants belonged to, besides not mentioning their ranks of cultivation. One mention of the Crimson Blood sect and the entire Colosseum would be engulfed by turbulence. The rest of his fellow contestants might be oblivious to his name at the moment, but they would definitely recognize the Crimson Blood sect. Moreover, Lu Yi was confident that he only needed to lay low and bide his time. It would not be long before someone else had accrued more Carnage points than him and taken his place at the top of the roster. The barely a dozen or so names on the roster signified 2 things. The Carnage Colosseum had just emerged and the real bloodbath had not yet begun. Those whose names were listed on the roster were the lucky ones who had found their prey and succeeded in bagging the kill. If the 5th Order body-tempering cultivator had not appeared nearby and foolishly made his hostility known so openly, then Lu Yi and Yi would not have been able to secure 1 kill so early. A full roster of Carnage should have 100 names. At the moment, the rest of the roster had yet to be filled up. The 120 points that showed after Lu Yi's name must be the points awarded to him for his kill. A Cloud River Realm 5th Order kill was 40 points. But Lu Yi, by being a lower rank, had defeated an enemy of superior rank, hence the bonus had brought the full figure up to 120. That would mean that everyone's points would be publicly displayed on the banner for all to see. As for the Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification and the 9 golden amulet, those had to be the rewards promised to the top cultivator, which would only be conferred when the Colosseum closed. Lu Yi did not have the rewards yet. He would though, if he managed to secure first place by the time the Carnage Colosseum ended. But that was a hope as distant as reaching for the stars above. Then again, the rewards had always been different every time the Carnage Colosseum opened. A Carnage Colosseum that encompassed a wider area would have better prizes. With this being a large-scale Colosseum, the rewards were rich enough. 9 golden amulets would have made it so easy for Lu Yi to rise through 5 orders without any difficulty. In addition, the prize of a Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification, too, was enticing enough. A wisp of that class could make any spot of ground extraordinarily rich with ambient spiritual chi. A Tertius-level Wisp would have far lesser potency. But if he could get a hold of a Primus-level Wisp, then it would be a great boon to both him and Yi. Lu Yi looked at the second place. The rewards were rich enough, just as well as the first place, but without the Wisp of Sanctification. The second runner-up would receive 2 less golden amulets. Those in the 4th to the 6th places would win 5 golden amulets apiece, while the rest within the best 10 contestants of the list would be awarded 3. Everyone else up until the 20th place would still win a golden amulet or 2. Contestants after the 20th place would be awarded a purple amulet or 2. Blue amulets would be rewarded to those between the 50th and the 100th. That was it. The end of the roster of Carnage. Whether those beyond the 100th mark would win any prizes or not, Lu Yi couldn't tell. There could be something, or maybe nothing. Nevertheless, it went without saying that the first 10 places, most especially the first 3, offered the best rewards. Just the amount of golden amulets could make anyone, Lu Yi included, salivate. So much so that the Cloud River Realm elites in this bloody tournament would bend over backwards to get as high a placing as possible. Understandably so, since just 1 or 2 golden amulets could barely do them any good. Winning as many golden amulets as possible was very likely their only chance to further their long-hampered progress. Across the tens of thousands of miles wide expanse, cultivators were hurrying this way. Soon enough, the beginning of the huge slaughter known as the Carnage Colosseum would be underway. Lu Yi was not expecting himself to achieve any favorable results. What mattered above all else was survival. He could not get out, hence he had to do whatever necessary to survive. To survive is to win. Right now, he was concerned with his name being at the top of the roster of Carnage. He could almost feel a target painted on his back and eyes watching him from the shadows. If that were true, then danger was coming and he needed to do something if he didn't want to end up dead. Chapter 501 That's your junior, isn't it? Lu Yi wasted no more time gawking at the billowing pennant in midair. He needed to get out of the peripheral areas of the Colosseum grounds as soon as possible. But he did not want to venture too deep into the central areas either, so the buffer zone between them would be his best bet for staying safe. At the same time, somewhere 30,000 miles away from Lu Ye's position, was another contestant of the Carnage Colosseum who was staring at the newly appeared roster of Carnage. Wei Kei was just miffed at the fact that he could not locate Lu Yi when he saw the first name at the top of the roster. He burst into a triumphant peal of laughter. He had been combing the area for signs of Lu Yi and was disappointed at the lack of promising results. In fact, he had been blaming himself for losing that one last chance of finding Lu Yi. If Lu Yi intended to stay away from him, then Wei Kei might never see him ever again, given the vast size of the Cloud River battlefield. Never did he expect that when fate had just shut the door in his face, it had left a window open for him. A Cloud River Realm Ninth Order like him would face no problem operating in the Carnage Colosseum. Few other Cloud River Realm cultivators could ever dare to defy him and still survive. He might not be the strongest of all Cloud River Realm cultivators, but Wei Kei was confident that getting within the first 10 places of the roster of Carnage was a piece of cake. Even with the relatively wider scale of this Carnage Colosseum, he was certain of winning at least 3 golden amulets. That was why he was pleased to see that his guess was right. Getting placed in the first 10 positions of the roster would ensure that he would walk away from this tournament with at least 3 golden amulets. But what left him absolutely overjoyed was seeing Lu Yi's name emblazoned in gold at the top of the roster. All good things come to those who wait. My patience is rewarded. What a stroke of fate that he's here in the Colosseum too. No one gets out of the Carnage Colosseum before the hour of its disappearance. That means he's trapped in here with me. I can still hunt him down. Wei Kei immersed himself in the fantasy of winning both the prize of being within the first 10 spots of this tournament and the bounty of claiming Lu Yi's head, musing about the riches and the glory that he would be showered with. But he was hardly the only one who had set their sights on Lu Yi's name. Several thousands of miles away, Jianghu and his brother were gazing at the roster of Carnage overhead. The Carnage Colosseum has only just begun and Lu Yi has already got himself 120 Carnage points. That must be a 5th order that he killed. Jianghu only needed to do a quick calculation to accurately divine what Lu Yi had done. Slaying a 5th order was something that he could do too, but Jianghu could barely confess to being able to replicate such speed. It had not even been minutes since the start of this Carnage Colosseum. The notion of how deadly Lu Yi could be invoked an involuntary shudder. But Jianghu could still remember the last time he went toe-to-toe with Lu Yi. He had lost back then and would have been dead too if not for the intervention of Wei Quebec. He's in the Colosseum. Call brother Lu Shu and the others. We cannot let Wei Kei get to him first. Jianghu barked to his brother Jiang Qingzi. The latter nodded vigorously. The pair of brothers might have an agreement with Wei Kei and he was the one who had supplied them with information about Lu Yi, but if Wei Kei wished to claim the credit for slaying the famous Lu Yi himself, then the brothers saw no reason to be coy and pretend that any partnership between them still existed. At any rate, they would rather trust the fellow members of their own order. In the meantime, the acrid tang of blood pervaded the atmosphere that clung to the terrain of a narrow gorge. The bloody sight of bodies sprawled everywhere indicated the aftermath of a freshly decided battle. Xiao Liang, clad in a set of tight garb for the convenience of his movement, was looking up, observing the roster of Carnage that had just materialized in the sky overhead seconds ago. When he saw where his name was, he frowned. What? I'm only placed second. He had just finished killing a few brazen buffoons who had the self-destructive foolishness to challenge him. He expected to see his name at the top of the roster after making short work of his challenges. Xiaoliang peered at the names that trailed below his. Most he recognized, even if he had not met some of them before. At the very least, Xiaoliang knew from reputation that the lion's share of the names on the roster was made up of Cloud River Realm 8th or 9th orders. Some he had even dueled against before, since most of them had entered the Cloud River battlefield at roughly the same time. Xiaoliang gazed at the name above his once more. Lu Yi, just who the hell is this fellow? If this stranger could score 120 Carnage points so quickly, then why the blazes have I not heard this name before? No. Wait. Lu Yi. I've heard that name somewhere. Xiaoliang paused. Then he knew where. A junior of his who had just ascended to the Cloud River realm entered the Cloud River battlefield bearing instructions from their order. According to the missive, it mentioned the name of a certain member of the Crimson Blood sect, Lu Yi, and Xiaoliang was given specific orders to eliminate this Lu Yi as reprisal for the humiliation that he had caused to their order. Back when he was still in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi had extorted supplies and treasure that were worth 300,000 contribution points, plus 20 journals of saber combat. Never before had the Raving Bladesmen endured such humiliation. That's the name. Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect. There might be people who shared the same name, but Lu Yi wasn't a very common name. Hence Xiaoliang was sure that this was the enemy he was instructed to hunt down. Even if he was mistaken, he couldn't care less. He had no qualms in butchering the one who snatched the first spot from right under his nose. Especially with the prospect of meeting Li Baxin again. If this really was the real Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect, Li Baxin would be sure to come to his junior brother's aid. That would be very interesting. Xiaoliang's face contorted with icy malice at the notion of Li Baxin. It was Li Baxin who had slain his senior Yan Xing. Since the day he was notified of Yan Xing's demise, Xiaoliang had vowed that he would not rest until he avenged his senior by killing Li Baxin himself. Yan Xing was the one who had taught him everything he knew. They were not only as inseparable as brothers, they were like father and son. Back in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Xiaoliang needed to fear Li Baxin. But here in the Cloud River battlefield, he had long outstripped Li Baxin. But owing to the size of this dimension, he had not been able to locate the ladder. This would be a chance. After a few seconds of quick thinking, Xiaoliang sent some communications. It did not take long for news that Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect was caught up inside the Carnage Colosseum to become public knowledge. Almost an hour later, at the banks of Streamview, one of the largest rivers in the Cloud River battlefield that stretched for tens of thousands of miles, a stranger stood by the river. Looking up into the sky, he hissed coldly, "I know you're hiding somewhere nearby, Li Baxin. What is this? Cowardice? And I thought all sword cultivators were reckless fools who would never shy from a fight." He had been pursuing Li Baxin when the latter suddenly vanished. He was sure that Li Baxin must be somewhere in the river, but exactly where, he did not know. Even with one more person, Li Baxin was still very much faster than he was, which was one of the many strengths of sword cultivators. Nevertheless, the stranger did not dare to venture into the river to hunt Li Baxin down. The latter could be hidden anywhere, waiting to ambush him where the hunted could become the hunter instead. Just when he was at a loss of what to do, the stranger sensed an incoming message on his battlefield imprint. He read the new missive. Suddenly he erupted into peals of laughter. "Lu Yi. Recognize that name? That's your junior, isn't it, Li Baxin?" Deep underwater, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan were clinging to each other, gripping firmly to the handle of an umbrella-like spirit artifact for dear life. Fatigue and stress hazed their gazes. Understandably so, they had been on the run since the first minute they stepped into the Cloud River battlefield, pursued by enemies and nemesis alike. Fortunately, Feng Yuechan had enough magical instruments to rely on, or they would have both been killed a long time ago. Li Baxin's face turned to stone when he heard Lu Ye's name. Feng Yuechan seized his arm, gingerly shaking her head at him. She was afraid that he would recklessly charge out into the open and get himself killed. Even with both their strengths together, the stranger was just too powerful for them. Otherwise they would not have had to hide here like a couple of mice. Feng Yuechan was not going to let their efforts go for naught. "How's this, Li Baxin?" the stranger's voice boomed again. "Your junior is now caught in the Carnage Colosseum too. Word has it that many people are now hunting him. So will I. I'll deal with him before coming back around to look for you." The stranger took into the air and left. There was no longer any point in staying. He could do nothing but sit on his own hands if Li Baxin refused to show. Besides, with the emergence of the Carnage Colosseum, This would be a chance for him to win some prizes. With his power, it was a virtual certainty. Beneath the depths of stream view, Li Baxin was aghast. Lu Yi, are you really caught inside Carnage Colosseum? Being an experienced cultivator who entered the Cloud River battlefield just a few months before Lu Yi did, Li Baxin knew perfectly what the Colosseum was all about. A massive battle royale-like meat grinder where there was no exit until the Colosseum ended. To make things worse, every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator inside would now be out for Lu Ye's blood. Poor thing. He's only been inside the battlefield for barely 2 months. For all we know, he might not even be a second order yet. How was he going to survive this? He immediately sent a message to Lu Yi. Lu Yi responded quickly, confirming that he really was inside the Carnage Colosseum. Baxin. Feng Yuechan cried softly. No. I must go. He's inside there and I cannot leave him there all by himself. Li Baxin uttered with a renewed conviction. He would not have cared if he didn't know. But now that the matter has been brought to his attention, Li Baxin's conscience could not let his own junior brother face all the dangers alone. I was only trying to say that I'm coming with you, said Feng Yuechan. Li Baxin gazed at her, long and hard. Knowing fully well that she would not be taking no for an answer, he nodded at once. Very well then. He would have preferred her to keep herself safe. But he knew her. They grew up together and they knew each other best. If he left her here, she would still come after him into the Colosseum anyway, and that would be more dangerous. Despite her delicate and frail appearance, Li Baxin knew that she was a strong woman. The Devoted Ones, as a Tier 2 sect, has elite members operating in the Cloud River battlefield, in addition to 2 arcane glades of their own for the use of their members. Li Baxin had tried urging Feng Yuechan to go to one of the 2 arcane glades for her own safety. But she got angry instead, and Li Baxin had to spend several days coaxing her before she finally forgave him. In the end, it was by having her with him that he managed to survive up until now. Which spoke volumes about how Li Baxin was the pariah amongst the Devoted Ones. Having a mother who commands just as much authority within the order as the Deputy Grand Master, in addition to having the respect and adoration of everyone in the order, ensured that she was supplied with the prerequisite tools and means to survive in the battlefield. A stark contrast to Li Baxin, who entered the battlefield with barely 2 coins to rub together. The umbrella-like spirit artifact not only had incredible defensive capabilities, but it could also mask the spiritual power signatures of those under it, making it a potent instrument of salvation. Chapter 502, Is This How Fickle Luck Can Be? As the Scarlet Empyrean overhead maintained its persistent vigil over the Carnage Colosseum domain, deep inside a subterranean cavern more than 30 meters below ground level, Lu Yi was busy planting ward flags everywhere in preparation for casting a magical ward. He did not know how many thousand Demon Ridge cultivators had seen his name at the top of the roster of Carnage. Needless to say, the number must be too great. The huge ruckus that he had befallen upon the Thousand Demon Ridge outposts of the central region of the Spirit Creek battlefield was the cause of this, and each and every one of them now wanted to quench their thirst for vengeance with his blood. Thousand Demon Ridge sects and orders might not stand any chance in resisting Lu Yi in the Spirit Creek battlefield, but that would not be the case here in the Cloud River battlefield. Enemies stronger and deadlier than him were 2 a penny, and none of them ever wanted the chance to bury him for good slip by again. Therefore, Lu Yi knew that Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators in the Cloud River battlefield must have been informed of his coming by their respective sects and orders the moment he entered this new dimension. But he could still lay low back then. So long as he maintained a low profile, few people would notice him. But once his identity was discovered, he would be in a perilous predicament. Like now. And to make things worse, being trapped in the Carnage Colosseum resembled in every way a vole being tossed into a cage full of cats. Hence, Lu Yi needed to make some insurance. He had a plethora of glyphs to rely on to keep himself safe, allowing him to hide and even mask his spiritual power signature. But accidents and unexpected mishaps might appear in his most pressing time of need to trip him. Someone might recognize or discover his identity, and when that happened, he would need a failsafe to fall back on if he could not secure a victory. This would be where a teleportation ward fit right in. The teleportation wards that he had used before were usually fixed-point teleportation wards that would be useful enough for escaping from normal threats. But here in the Carnage Colosseum, Lu Yi needed a safer and more secure way. Multi-point teleportation wards. Multi-point teleportation wards would be where all teleportation wards could be used to travel to any other sibling in the system. To that end, he expected that he would need only 7 to 8 of such teleportation wards scattered all around the Colosseum grounds. That would give him the mobility to escape everywhere anytime without fear of being trapped or cornered. Without the superiority he once commanded in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi knew that he needed to renounce his old penchant for getting into trouble. Unlike fixed-point teleportation wards, this rendition of conveyance wards was understandably more complex. But fortunately for Lu Yi, the increase in his capabilities had also made the difficulty of conjuring these wards easier. Lu Yi completed his first multi-point teleportation ward in an hour. But that was not all. He constructed more wards around it, some to conceal the teleportation ward's presence and a few to detonate the place to prevent anyone from finding out what he had done here. That was another form of insurance. One to prevent others from discovering his insurance. Only after making sure that everything was finally complete, Lu Yi left the place. He would need to be on the lookout for another hidden spot like this for his next teleportation ward. Just like before, he sped forward, refusing to fly so as to not attract any unwanted attention. At the same time he remained vigilant, his senses alert for any unusual signs. At the first sign of trouble he would cast glyph, concealment on himself and stay down. The careful measures seemed to have paid off. All the way Lu Yi encountered nothing. Along the way, Lu Yi never stopped picking up signatures of spiritual powers clashing. That must be ongoing skirmishes happening around him. Every once in a while, a powerful champion would zip by over his head. Only an 8th or a 9th order would dare to fly without fear of getting attacked. Naturally, Lu Yi knew better than to reveal himself to them. He ran for more than 100 miles before he paused to make sure that he was completely alone. Next, he conjured a glyph, space, using it to sense the link between him and the teleportation ward he built earlier. Without any actual way to find out how far he could stretch the connection, he needed to stop and test to make sure. He could feel that the link was still very strong. That would mean that he could go further. Lu Yi pressed on for almost another 100 miles. That was when he felt the link getting weak. The limit must be nearing. That allowed him to come to a hypothesis. His present rank of cultivation would allow the link of his teleportation wards to stretch as far as 200 miles. That was a vast improvement compared to before, which was a real boon to his plan. The farther his teleportation wards could be from each other, the safer it would be for him as well. He called Yi and sent her to look for a suitable spot underground while he reconnoitered his surroundings too. Sure enough, they found another cave. Lu Yi would have preferred a better spot, but this was the next best thing he could find in the vicinity. He could only hope that any cultivator who passed by would not develop the curiosity to step inside for a look. Lu Yi went inside and traveled almost 50 meters underground before he went to work while Yi watched the entrance of the cave to make sure that there wasn't anyone else. If someone were to trap him inside before the teleportation ward was complete, then Lu Yi would be doomed. Another hour of toiling saw the successful construction of another teleportation ward, along with the other wards for concealment and self-destruction. He had been careful enough in the position of his wards that any cultivator who ventured inside might not trigger the explosive wards so long as he or she did not travel too deep inside. Lu Yi emerged from the cave. He looked up. The roster of Carnage was still hanging conspicuously in mid-air, its entire length and breadth surging in the winds up above. He scanned the list of names. His name had dropped far out of the 50th place, which was within his expectation. More than 4 hours had passed since the Carnage Colosseum first started and numerous skirmishes had broken out everywhere. That would mean people were killed and that would translate into Carnage points. It did not take long for others to rake in more than 100 Carnage points, and that was how Lu Yi's name kept sliding down the roster. At this rate, it won't be too long before his name would be fully off the roster for good. Lu Yi could not care less about his position on the roster. He wanted to survive, and that was all that mattered. He continued his journey. All thanks to glyph, concealment, he could travel on without worrying too much about his safety. Even if he were to stumble into another stranger, he could still easily slip past him as long as they were not in close contact. In almost half a day, Lu Yi had completed up to 4 transportational wards that were linked to each other. Knowing this restored some sense of assurance. Still, he needed more. Lu Yi was stealthily speeding ahead when something caught his attention. He looked up and gazed into the distance. In the horizon, a breathtaking display of color emerged in the form of an iridescent glow at the edge of the skies. Gradually, the luminous hues spread and transformed into a magnificent plume of clouds, painting the sky with ethereal and awe-inspiring beauty. That's the token of providence. The spectacle known as the Token of Providence was a daily phenomenon that only a scarce handful of cultivators have ever witnessed, given the sheer length and breadth of the battlefield. No one could possibly guess when and where the next token of providence would take place. Lu Yi himself had only seen it once since entering the battlefield. But the conditions seemed to vary within the radius of hundreds of thousands of kilometers of the Carnage Colosseum expanse. Every day, the same aerial spectacle of iridescence would appear in different spots around the Colosseum, and every pair of eyes in the vicinity would notice it without fail, giving them a 2 or 3/10 of a chance to enjoy some of heaven's bestowments. In addition, almost every token of providence spectacle yielded iridescent plumes that would confer one or even several golden amulets in one go, making it an attractive phenomenon that all champions and elites in the Colosseum hankered for. Lu Yi peered at the roiling cluster of kaleidoscopic glimmers rolling towards him, a strange dread creeping over his shoulders. He could still remember the last time he witnessed a token of providence incident. Speak of the devil and he shall appear, huh? And he was right. The cloud of prismatic sparkles barely formed, and it began barreling straight at Lu Yi like a giant glacier thundering toward him from above. Despite being still very far away, Lu Yi was certain. It really was coming this way. There was nothing else to think about. Lu Yi turned around and bolted. If only he were outside instead of being stuck here inside this Carnage Colosseum. He would have a slight interest to participate in the race for an amulet or two. He would be more than happy to leave the blue, purple, or even gold ones to other stronger cultivators and just settle with a white or even a green one. Alas, the fact remained that he was still inside the Carnage Colosseum. Stuck with his proverbial neck out, every champion coming his way, especially those whose battlefield imprint glowed red, would immediately see him. No Cloud River Realm Third Order like him could ever hope to survive such odds. Even if he had 9 lives. As he sprinted away, Lu Yi stole a glance over his shoulder. That token of providence cloud was still coming his way. A throb pulsed at the corner of his eyes. Is this how fickle luck can be? Instead of giving me anything good, it's giving me trouble. All of a sudden, Lu Yi screeched to a halt and hid. Before him, he could sense a presence approaching, one powerful and enormous. It had to be someone coming after the iridescent clouds. From the spiritual power signature, they seemed to be an 8th order, and Lu Yi was not surprised. Only a champion of such strength would dare to come with such fanfare. But the champion stopped. At barely 300 meters away from Lu Yi, he just stood there, quietly looking at the approaching spectacle. That left Lu Yi in a difficult quandary. Unable to move, he remained where he was with glyph, concealment activated. The biggest problem was that Lu Yi did not know which faction the newcomer belonged to. All would have been well if he were a fellow member of the Grand Sky Coalition, but if he were to expose himself to someone from the Thousand Demon Ridge, then he would be dead meat. The appearance of the Token of Providence event at this inopportune moment had no doubt attracted the eyes of many in the Carnage Colosseum. Some were still charging this way and others were intercepting them. All of a sudden, any piece around these parts erupted into pandemonium. Lu Yi could only pray and hope that the iridescent clouds came no closer to him. But with every second, the cloud just refused to veer off. It kept coming his way, shepherding a mob of cultivators in its wake, some in the air while the rest traveled on foot, while more fights broke out every now and then. Out of nowhere, Lu Yi felt his senses tingle. Something alive had just stepped through the edges of his spiritual perception. Lu Yi quietly activated glyph, insight on both his eyes. A blinding deluge of lights surged into his vision as the glyph powered up. There, hidden not far away, a ghost cultivator. But Lu Yi noted the absence of any sensation coming from his battlefield imprint. He could be an ally. Although Lu Yi wasn't sure if battlefield imprints would provide any warning if one or both parties were invisible. Because if battlefield imprints could be depended on to react when an invisible enemy was nearby, then ghost cultivators would have lost their single most important advantage. Ghost cultivators relied on the elements of stealth and surprise to launch attacks. If battlefield imprints could give any warning even when they were hidden from sight, then anyone in the vicinity would know that a ghost cultivator had to be on the prowl somewhere nearby. Yet the unseen ghost cultivator seemed to have realized that he or she was being watched, swiveling around to look in Lu Ye's direction. Unlike Lu Yi, the ghost cultivator did not have glyph, insight, and hence he or she could see nothing at all. Chapter 503 The Unlucky Bloke. That the unknown ghost cultivator could sense Lu Yi looking at them was sign enough that they were at least competent. But without any means to ascertain where Lu Yi really was, they did not want to risk revealing themselves further. Moments later, the ghost cultivator was gone. Whether because of feeling insecure at being watched or something else, they had surreptitiously left the hiding spot. Meanwhile, the iridescent cloud had stopped its advance at more than a dozen miles away from Lu Ye's position. He cast a gaze in the direction of the bright glimmering plumes, feeling a shiver creeping down his spine. That was where he was when the sighting of the Token of Providence event first started. If he had foolishly chosen to stay, then he would be just under the iridescent cloud now. Whatever the matter was, he was glad that he had made the right choice or he would be in real danger. No, wait. Lu Yi remembered the last Token of Providence incident he witnessed. The iridescent cloud had released spates of amulets in all directions away from it. No one would be at the bottom of the cloud because nothing would fall directly beneath the cloud. That means, I'm at the worst spot possible, a dozen or so miles away from the iridescent clouds. That's where the amulets would fall? Oh heavens! Lu Yi was at a total loss for words at his own stupidity. But it was too late for remedies. He could not afford to move an inch or he would expose himself. Everywhere around him, he could feel the presence of several spiritual power signatures, each carefully and deliberately distanced. Lu Yi did not even have to guess who they were. Cultivators who came for the amulets. The nearest one was perched atop a tree almost 60 meters away, looking up into the sky. The only solution Lu Yi could come up with was to stay put. Only when the iridescent cloud started to disperse amulets could he make use of the chaos to mount an escape. He waited there, immobile and silent. So did the others around him, the horde of Cloud River Realm 8th or 9th orders nearby. There was no bickering or banter. Everyone was poised to pounce. Minutes passed in silence until Lu Yi heard a rustling susurration coming from the direction of the many-hued plume. It roiled and churned. What followed next was exactly what everybody here was waiting to see. Ribbons of colorful lights shot out of the cloud like a mesmerizing display of a fountain of light as amulets were spewed in different directions. Whether amulets were gold, purple, blue, green, or even white, no one knew which was which. The amulets were not shining with their own respective colors when they first appeared. Only after flying for several miles would the amulets finally emit the glow of their own colors. Naturally, the strong would aim for higher-class amulets while the weak could only stick to trying their luck with anything else easier and nearer. But this particular Token of Providence event seemed to have attracted a huge following of cultivators. The contest for the amulets would most likely be a rampageous bedlam. The cultivators all watched with anticipation the many streamers of brilliant radiance zipping over their heads, each of them gradually fading to reveal the respective amulet's true nature. Requiring no further impetus, the multitude of cultivators all rose as one, soaring into the skies to reach for the amulets they were eyeing. Some went up alone, others formed groups. It really was a veritable carnival, given how messy and discombobulated the humongous crowd in the sky was. Even so, more than half of the amulets here had already been settled in the first few seconds before the free-for-all for the rest even began. That was the cue Lu Yi needed. As everyone sprang into action, so did he. Maintaining glyph concealment needed slow movement equal to that of an ordinary person's walking pace. He could not risk breaking his cover, therefore this was the fastest he could manage. Lu Yi could sense the tumultuous undulations of spiritual power around him amidst a backdrop of frenzied skirmishes, where the amalgamation of snarls, grunts, and occasional wails of anguish resounded. He did not need to turn around at all. Needless to say, the ongoing carnival of carnage around him was expectedly and understandably brutal and gritting. If this were outside in the usual Cloud River battlefield dimension, no one would have wanted to put their lives on the line just for a couple of amulets. But here in the Carnage Colosseum, as soon as one realized that a fellow competitor of an amulet was from an opposing faction, it would be a no-holds-barred deathmatch. Lu Ye's stealthy escape was steadily inching towards completion when a sudden blood-curdling cry reverberated in the distance, rapidly drawing nearer and nearer until it swiftly shattered the otherwise growing silence, boring swiftly into his ears. He jerked around just in time to see a blood-drenched cultivator falling from the sky, clearly one of the defeated in the contest for amulets. Someone must have struck him down, and the amount of blood he had lost showed that he was heavily wounded, especially since he was falling down from the sky without being able to regain any shred of balance at all. There was one problem: he was falling straight into Lu Yi. The precipitous fall made Lu Yi wonder if he could take the hit from that incoming human projectile. Without any hesitation, he sidestepped immediately. The swift movement caused glyph concealment to fail, and Lu Yi was exposed. With a deafening bang, the man smashed into the ground, kicking up a dust storm of soot and smoke while he rolled again and again before finally stopping. Twice he tried to get up, but to no avail. He was just too weak. He puked blood and scrambled to his knees, gasping for breath and his face as pallid as chalk. Then his misty vision caught sight of a glow. The glow of a battlefield imprint on the back of another cultivator's hand. Someone's nearby. He realized. Then he noticed it. A Grand Sky Coalition cultivator. He looked up at once, his eyes meeting those of a bewildered and exasperated Lu Yi. Lu Yi was just trying to get out of this mess only to get hurtled right back into trouble again. The soft pale blue glow on the back of his hand was accentuated by the smog-filled ambience like a beacon in a fog. But there was no time for regret. Lu Yi swiftly recollected and propelled himself forward with the explosiveness of a predator lunging at prey, drawing inviolable as he charged. He did not know how powerful his foe still was, there was no time to think. But he looked badly injured, and since he was the only one to realize Lu Ye's presence, Lu Yi could not risk letting him stay alive. The stranger tried to clamber to his feet as he saw Lu Yi charge. But he was hurt during his skirmishes earlier and the fall had made the injuries worse. He could barely summon and focus his spiritual power and he could barely count the number of bone fractures all over him, making it almost impossible to get up. But Lu Yi wasn't going to wait until he got up and prepared to defend himself. He shot past the incapacitated man, his blade tracing a straight fiery arc across his throat. With a petrifying shiver, the man stiffened, his lips quivering as if to speak although not a syllable came out. A tiny red glow flew over and landed on the back of Lu Ye's hand. But he was quickly joined by another figure who landed abruptly beside him, the powerful signature of his spiritual power indicating that he was a Cloud River Realm Ninth Order. Shock and panic gripped Lu Yi as he forcefully swiveled himself to look at the back of the newcomer's hand. That was when he finally calmed down. Neither of their battlefield imprints lit up. They were both Grand Sky Coalition cultivators. The man peered at the dead body on the ground before he returned to glare at Lu Yi. Exasperated, he snorted, "Bloody thanks for stealing my kill, kid." That would mean that he was the one who had struck down the poor stranger and he had come down to finish off his opponent for good. But the kill, plus the Carnage points, had fallen right into Lu Ye's lap and he got to it first. Lu Yi returned a blank look at him. He did not ask for it. It was the poor unlucky bloke who fell right in front of him and Lu Yi had no other choice but to complete the deed before he started to alert the whole Colosseum about his presence. Nevertheless, the allied champion did not choose to begrudge Lu Yi any further. He quickly noticed that Lu Yi was just a third order and frowned, "Get out of this place now before you get yourself killed." Lu Yi politely clasped his fist in formal greeting and turned around. He hurried away as quickly as he could this time, not even activating glyph, concealment. The champion waited until Lu Yi was gone before he bent down and collected the dead man's storage bag. Next, he pried open the man's fingers and from inside retrieved a blue amulet. He did not bully Lu Yi out of his just desserts, it was rightfully his all along. The champion turned around. The pentachromatic iridescent cloud was churning once more. More beams of light sprayed everywhere from it, eliciting another round of amulets whizzing in all directions. The champion took to the sky and rejoined the contest. Lu Yi sped for almost 100 miles without stopping. When he finally did, he looked back and saw the many-hued iridescent cloud now almost half of the girth of when he first saw it. The Token of Providence event had to be ending soon and the golden amulets would be appearing any moment now. To stay in the thick of the area now would be to get stuck between a two-sided royal rumble that would surely incur huge losses. If only his cultivation rank was higher, then he would be able to join in the event too. He wouldn't have to hanker for purple or gold amulets, just the blue or even green ones would do. But as a third order, he would not be able to survive such a brutal pandemonium, especially by himself. Lu Yi was about to turn around and leave when his gaze transfixed upon the roster of Carnage. The rankings on the roster were changing with blinding speed. Several names vanished, giving way to others, indicating that these cultivators have been slain or their names would not have gone missing for no reason. Some would rise, signifying a triumph, while others fell several rungs as more piled higher to overtake them. Then he saw a name at the 15th place on the roster. A name that made the corners of his eyes throb uncontrollably. Lu Yi, 370 Carnage points, 1 golden amulet. The last time he checked, his name was in the 50s of the roster and as time passed further without him adding more kills to his belt, he was expecting his name to fall out of the roster by another half-day's time. Yet here was his name in the 15th place on the roster, and his Carnage points had now risen to as much as a whopping 250 points compared to his former tally of 120. That's impossible. Since the Carnage Colosseum began, Lu Yi had killed 2 enemies and still, instead of falling out of the roster of Carnage, he remained in the 15th place. At any rate, this was not an indication that the rest of the other contestants of the Colosseum were weak. Most of the rosters were cultivators beyond the 7th order, 8th or 9th orders at least. That could only mean that the award of Carnage points for killing a cultivator far beyond one's rank of cultivation must be very, very substantial indeed. His first kill was a 5th order, an enemy 2 ranks beyond his, and that earned him 120 Carnage points. The kill just now was a whopping 250 points. Lu Yi quickly made some calculations. That yielded the conclusion: the unlucky bloke he slew just now was a 7th order. Cloud River Realm 7th orders were worth 50 Carnage points each. With the difference of 4 ranks between Lu Yi and the stranger he killed, that would multiply the amount by 5 times, making it 250 Carnage points in total. A 7th order, eh? Wow. Lu Yi did not know what to say. Just when he thought that his name would be dropping out of the roster, it got propelled into prominence once more. There was no telling how long it would take this time for his name to plunge down again. At the very least, Lu Yi was consoled by the fact that the roster of Carnage did not reveal one's rank of cultivation, or everyone in the Colosseum would see how a 3rd order's name was smacked right in the middle of a bunch of 8th and 9th orders. His name would stand out right from the first glance. This reminded him of how he had got his name listed in the Spirit Creek Battlefield's roll of supremacy at the rank of Heaven 7, taking the entire battlefield back then by storm. Chapter 504 Heaven's Feud with Me? Lu Yi withdrew his gaze and continued on his way. An hour later he found another cave which he slipped inside of and worked on conjuring more wards. The Token of Providence event had ended and the pentachromatic iridescent clouds were gone, but that did not mean the end of the impromptu battle royale. If 8th and 9th order cultivators were usually reluctant to fight, the distribution of amulets by the event was certainly an impetus that lighted a spark to the tinderbox, making this a savage brawl where all scruples were either temporarily deferred or downright forgotten. The names on the roster of Carnage never stopped shifting up and down with every triumph and defeat as the gritting slaughter continued, reminiscent of the rapid frenzy of a split-flap display. Such was the Carnage Colosseum, an environment of untold perils for weaker and younger cultivators, but a cornucopia of opportunities for those whose thirst for more action or rewards remained unsatiated. To that end, even as time passed, the number of cultivators in the Colosseum did not reduce. Instead, more cultivators were swarming into the Colosseum. They did not come to get their names on the roster of Carnage. With numerous cultivators faster and deadlier than them, there really was no chance of climbing the roster of Carnage. Even if they did, the placements would not be high enough to guarantee any rich rewards. The true value of being ranked on the roster of Carnage was getting into one of the first 20 spots where winners would be awarded gold amulets. Their target was also not the Token of Providence events, which would eventually culminate into nothing more than just brutal free-for-alls where low-tier cultivators would count themselves lucky to survive, let alone expect to win any amulets. For what then? What could impel these cultivators into entering the Colosseum willingly at the risk of their own safety and life? It was the countless opportunities that abound the entire Colosseum. Lu Yi had finished his latest multi-point teleportation ward after testing its link to the rest of the wards scattered everywhere else and was leaving the cave when he saw a twinkle of light winking at him. He could have sworn that the speck of light was not there when he first came, meaning that it only appeared recently. Which Lu Yi was quite certain was the case, or he would have not missed something so obvious the moment he arrived. The twinkling speck of light must have appeared only after he went inside the cave to construct the wards. Lu Yi recognized what the twinkling light was. He had read about them before from the Divine Trade Association materials. Without any hesitation, he strode to the light and groped at it. The light vanished immediately the moment he closed his fist around something solid, revealing it as an amulet of the lowest class, a white one. Nevertheless, Lu Yi knew better than to look at a gift horse in the mouth. He got the amulet for nothing after all. Not wanting to loiter, he left quickly. Specks of light heralding surprises could be a common occurrence in the Colosseum. As to what surprises these glow orbs held, no one could tell for sure. It could be spirit stones, pills, or even spirit artifacts and amulets, anything that could be a boon, big or small, to all cultivators. They could appear any moment, any time, anywhere. Such were the fortuitous opportunities that teemed the treacherous Carnage Colosseum. There was no doubt that the appearances of these encounters were the handiwork and elaborate contrivances of the invisible hand that steered all that occurs in the battlefield, the mysterious entity known as the Heavens, who shared the same cold-hearted indifference of a man toying with an ant nest by luring more cultivators into the battlefield using various sorts of valuable supplies they were so dependent on. Thus every time the Carnage Colosseum opened, it marked the launch of another festival, one of brutal slaughter and untold opportunities. Nevertheless, it was these pervasively widespread opportunities that were the motivations that had lured so many cultivators, strong, mediocre, and weak alike, into the Colosseum. The very element that worked like a charm. Most of them were not here for the roster of Carnage, and even fewer would ever hope to benefit from any token of Providence events, hence they did all they could to stay alive. So long as they drew breath, they could encounter more prizes anywhere around the Colosseum. Lu Yi might have picked up a pathetic white amulet, but on another day he might be lucky enough to stumble upon a gold amulet or even a wisp of sanctification. There were rumors of a cultivator who had once struck gold by finding a spirit artifact so rare that it was worth a queen's ransom. In the meantime, Lu Yi went on searching for more locations to stash his teleportation wards, which were simple and straightforward enough for him, all thanks to glyph, concealment, and his incredible spiritual senses. Time breezed by swiftly. A day had passed, and Lu Yi was sitting in a subterranean cavern, right at the center of the newest teleportation ward he had constructed. He had completed 12 multi-link teleportation wards, and each of them could at least send him to 2 other wards elsewhere. This was the safety net that he would rely on if and when his identity was exposed. He could choose to stand and fight, but in the event of overwhelming odds, Lu Yi could always fall back to any one of the teleportation wards and escape elsewhere. But right now he remained there, completely immobile. The Carnage Colosseum might be a veritable treasure trove filled to the gunnels with prizes and chances, but so were its perils. More so, since virtually every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator would have been informed of his presence in the Colosseum by now. For all he knew, there could be parties actively scouring every inch of the Colosseum with a fine-tooth comb for him. To that end he thought it wise to just sit tight for the moment. Being down underground, Lu Yi could not see the roster of Carnage. The last time he saw it, his name had been pushed out of the 50th spot again. With enough time, his name would be off the roster of Carnage. Every 2 hours, Lu Yi would activate his teleportation ward to reassess its link with the rest, examining to see if any one of the wards in the whole network had failed. He had taken special care to choose only spots covert and concealed, but one could never be too careful. One could not discount the possibility of a curious cultivator venturing inside for a look, especially the one he came from earlier. With the Heavens sprinkling goodies everywhere in the vicinity, somebody might be inquisitive enough for a spelunking trip inside the cave, hoping to find some hidden treasure. Fortunately, there were his self-destructive wards for this contingency. Once triggered, the wards would detonate and destroy every trace of him ever being there before. No one would discover what he had done there. Not far away, he could sense signatures of spiritual power erupting. A fight had to be going on nearby, and from the strength of the signatures, the combatants had to be at least 7th orders. Which hardly surprised Lu Yi, since fights like these happened everywhere in the Colosseum. He would just have to stay down here. If anyone were to discover him hiding here, he would just immediately teleport elsewhere. Safe. I'm safe. A satisfied Lu Yi mused, feeling somewhat secure. All he had to do was wait until the Colosseum's conclusion so that he could get out of this accursed death trap. He swallowed another spirit pill and took out another manuscript to read. Lu Yi had finished reading everything Lady Yun gave him, but he recently learned that rereading them would yield fresh discoveries, details that he had missed out before during his first read, making the activity the best way to kill time. Lu Yi was reading when an anomaly in the space before him tore his attention away. Right in front of him, hanging in midair, was a tiny black dot that had appeared out of nowhere. Lu Yi observed it intently. The black dot gradually grew in size before it began spinning in spirals. Next, a speck of gold bloomed like a blinding flower. As the golden speck of light turned brighter and bigger, Lu Yi saw what it was, a gold amulet. Suspended almost a meter above ground as if by an invisible force, it swayed lazily to the motion of an unseen undulation in the air. The gold amulet looked no different from the gold amulets he had seen before, save for a strange pale emerald glow enveloping it. Lu Yi squinted his eyes as a foreboding dread coiled its claws around him. Oh no! Lu Yi knew exactly what it was. That a gold amulet would appear before him out of the blue could never be a random coincidence. The entity known as the Heavens selected a cultivator every day and bestowed upon the chosen a gold amulet. But unlike all other gold amulets that could be stowed away, kept, or even used immediately, this particular gold amulet could never be touched until after 24 hours. But that was hardly the entirety of the caveat. Gold amulets bestowed in this manner would emit a pulsing blast of spiritual power every 6 hours, thus exposing its bearer's position no matter where he or she could be hiding. Any other cultivator nearby would instantly be alerted. Lu Yi stared at the saffron gold luminescence bobbing placidly several inches from him with a conflicted grimace. He could barely articulate how he felt right now. Is this good luck or is this the worst one possible? Out of the hundreds and thousands of cultivators scattered across the vast Colosseum expanse, he was chosen to be awarded, or cursed, with the gold amulet. Lu Yi had made up his mind to ride out the Carnage Colosseum until its end, and for that to happen, he expected to stay hidden the whole time. Now this. How was he going to stay hidden with something that would broadcast his position every 6 hours attached to his hip? If this proverbial thorn was going to stay figuratively embedded in him, that would mean that he would be exposed to dangers at least 3 to 4 times for the next 24 hours. Just what the hell is going on? Do the heavens have a feud with me? Lu Yi was picking up a pattern here. The many-hued iridescent cloud during the Token of Providence event before was clearly intended for him even when he was painstakingly trying to keep a low profile. Yet here the heavens had just dropped a bombshell right into his lap once again. So much for having good luck, he mused sardonically. Lu Yi watched the gold amulet basking in its aureate flame-like glow. Then an idea came to him. But he needed to test it out, and to do that would incur a certain amount of risk. Deciding to grind and bear the consequences anyhow, he activated the teleportation ward he was sitting inside of. Next second he began to feel the strange sensation native to the use of teleportation ward. A powerful pull as if the ground beneath him had vanished into a bottomless abyss and he was being drawn into it. A split second later, Lu Yi was gone as if the ground had swallowed him whole. If only he could avoid using the teleportation ward. Using the ward, this one and the one that he wished to be conveyed to, produced spiritual power emanations, signatures that everyone else nearby could detect, and this was detrimental to his plans. But there was little time to worry about that now. By the time the strange tugging feeling was gone, he found himself sitting at the center of another one of his teleportation wards more than 200 miles away, nauseous and discombobulated by the ordeal. But there was no rest for the wicked. The first thing he did was to project his senses and make sure that he was alone. Only when he was satisfied that the coast was clear did he finally breathe his first sigh of relief in what had been several minutes of gripping anxiety. He looked up and saw something that immediately weighed on his shoulder like a hill. Even after 200 miles away, the gold amulet remained attached to him like a monkey on one's back. As much as he anticipated this, seeing with his own eyes what he dreaded transpiring came like a sledgehammer blow. But he was not surprised. Knowing full well that this was another one of the heavens' ironic contrivances, he never expected to be let off the hook easily. And since he couldn't change a thing, then he would have to meet this difficulty as best as he could. He reached for the gold amulet and clutched it in his fist. It was hard. The pale chartreuse phosphorescence looked fragile like a marshmallow at first glance, but it was as unexpectedly hard as a diamond. He tested trying to stow the amulet away, but to no avail too. It was true then. This gold amulet would remain stuck on him for 24 hours. It couldn't be put away nor used. As much as this predicament had almost sent him into a panicking frenzy, perhaps it wasn't that bad anyway. Any other Cloud River Realm Third Order would have to start rueing their imminent doom if they were beset by such a fate, unless they were lucky enough to latch themselves to a champion powerful enough to protect them. Otherwise, good luck trying to stay alive with their position getting broadcasted every 6 hours. But Lu Yi had a real chance of staying alive. For what it was worth, he was grateful that he had not been idle. The entire day's worth of work in constructing all 12 teleportation wards had paid off. So even if his position was broadcasted, Lu Yi could easily teleport himself to the next ward. That could mean losing one ward whenever his position was being exposed, 3 to 4 teleportation wards, but it was a price he was willing to pay if it ended with him winning a gold amulet. An amulet of this quality would no doubt be a boon to his progress. Reflecting on the forthcoming fruits of his labor at least restored some sense of confidence in him. Chapter 505 The Ill-Fated Encounter. On that note, Lu Yi felt more at ease knowing that he still had a very good chance at staying alive despite whatever odds the heavens were stacking against him. He took the gold amulet and slipped it into his pocket and went back to reading. That made the time pass by relatively quickly. With the first 6th hour mark nearing, Lu Yi tucked away his book and extracted the gold amulet. Next, he waited and observed, staying at the center of his teleportation ward. The information he had indicated that the gold amulet would erupt once every 6 hours, broadcasting its position. But as to how, Lu Yi wasn't informed at all, and this was the first time he encountered something like this. Seconds ticked like an eternity. All of a sudden, the already shiny glow of the gold amulet blazed with a stronger and brighter radiance that mimicked a star, a radiance that could permeate through everything, anything, blasting out of the cave in a column of light that reached straight for the clouds overhead. That was not all. With the column of light, erupted a huge pulse of spiritual power. Lu Yi had been anticipating something like this, but seeing it up close was nevertheless awesome enough that he needed to squint his eyes at the blinding light. Beyond any doubt, every single cultivator within 100 miles of this place would see this spectacle. The humongous beam of light lasted for 10 seconds before it finally ebbed away like extinguishing embers, and the gold amulet resumed its usual lethargic green glow as if the phenomenon seconds ago did not happen at all and everything was just a dream. But reality would prove otherwise. Lu Yi was already hearing cascades of footfalls approaching, followed closely by chatter. Here there's a cave. Full. Hiding in a cave and getting himself trapped inside. This must be an amateur who knows nothing about the Colosseum. Careful. Let's ascertain his affiliation first. Lu Yi could hear different voices in conversation, at least 3 to 4 people. They must be a group. Parties like this were commonly made up of lower-tier cultivators here in the Colosseum. Cultivators powerful enough to hold their own oftentimes traveled alone. While most champions preferred being alone out of temperament, some were just unwilling to share whatever bounty they discovered individually. Hey there inside. We're Grand Sky Coalition cultivators. If you're an ally, please show yourself, cried a voice from outside. But Lu Yi wasn't born yesterday and he was not going to believe that. No matter who the strangers outside were, he was ready to leave at first notice. That does it, let's get inside and just be done with it, said another voice. They must have been nearby since they were the first to arrive. But one thing was certain, everyone within 100 miles from here had seen the beam of light. If he delayed too long, this place would be swarming with enemies, or competitors to the prize. The party's collective strength might be good, but not good enough to deal with true champions. The one who suggested rushing inside had barely finished speaking when everyone detected the signature of spiritual power coming from inside. They shared nervous and oblivious glances before the leader of the party led the rest inside with their spiritual powers channeled and ready. Carefully they made their way inside, anticipating resistance. 3 seconds later, a huge rumble came roaring out from the yawning mouth of the cave, accompanied by violent spates of flames spitting out of it, and the men came hurrying out, looking utterly beaten and disheveled as they muttered words of curses under their breaths. None of them knew that booby traps were waiting for them inside. While all of them managed to escape unscathed, the ordeal was enough to reduce them to nothing more than a bunch of ashen-faced beggars with scorches and bruises all over them, plus the chaotic state of their internal energies that had severely weakened them. Gods be damned, that's a ward cultivator inside. A shadow loomed over them for one transitory beat as a figure landed before them, their battlefield imprints glowed immediately. The newcomer, a powerful 8th Order, studied their bedraggled appearances and muttered curtly, "Where is it?" The party regarded the threatening presence of the newcomer apprehensively. One of them barked warily, "Don't know. There's no one inside." The newcomer could barely believe that. He was positive that he felt traces of spiritual power coming from inside the cave just now. How could there be no one after these men had gone in? But as far as his suspicions went, little did he realize that the men weren't lying at all. Coldly he hissed, "Surrender what you found and I'll leave you be. Otherwise, every one of you will not be walking away from here alive." There really was no one inside, the one who spoke earlier explained testily. "We came here first, but what we found inside were booby traps. Nothing and no one else. This I swear in the name of the heavens." The 8th Order frowned. If these men were willing to swear to the heavens that they found nothing inside, then that could only be the truth. He paused several seconds to think. Then without warning his hand shot up and he fired a blast. If the gold amulet were lost, then he would at least profit by killing and looting these men. And a furious clash ensued. It would not be long for more cultivators to congregate here at the caved-in underground cavity, and the brawl would crescendo into another full-scale battle where cultivators from both sides would band up and hurl whatever they could at the enemies with reckless abandon. In the meantime, Lu Yi was very, very far away, more than 200 miles out, inside another cave, utterly oblivious as to the powder keg that he had unwittingly set off. Not that it was his business anyway. But now that he had witnessed firsthand the spectacular extravaganza the gold amulet could cause, it was clear to him that trying to use a magical ward to contain its eruption would just be futile. That was the original plan he concocted prior to the gold amulet's eruption. But after assessing its sheer magnitude, Lu Yi began to realize that as another one of the heavens' contrivances, no human could possibly contain it. Being several meters underground inside a cave too had failed to contain the blast of light tunneling up into the clouds. That would leave sacrificing more teleportation wards as the only viable way of surviving this tribulation. He would need to quickly move to another position as soon as the eruption of light and spiritual power by the gold amulet had ended. Fortunately, he had constructed enough teleportation wards for this contingency. Lu Yi sat there and waited for minutes to make sure that he really was alone. Satisfied at last that nothing was around, he put away the gold amulet and went back to reading. 6 hours flitted by swiftly. Just like before, the gold amulet's eruption of the beam of light came right on time, followed closely by the terrible wave of spiritual power. This time, Lu Yi did not wait to observe or listen. He immediately activated his teleportation ward and moved to the next spot. Cultivators would arrive at his previous position only to trigger the explosive wards, and they would leave the place empty-handed, with litanies of curses and expletives being repeated incessantly. Like what happened 6 hours before, cultivators later converged on this place and another furious battle was sparked. Meanwhile, more than tens of thousands of miles away from the Carnage Colosseum, a ray of light was streaking across the sky like a comet. It was a sword, and riding upon it were Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, both of whom were racing as speedily as the sword allowed towards the opening into the Carnage Colosseum. As soon as he heard about Lu Yi being trapped inside the Colosseum, Li Baxin rushed to find out about its whereabouts. Too far and he might not get inside in time. But hearing that it was just a 2-day journey from his present location, he knew he just might be able to make it. He did not tell Lu Yi about his intention to come to find him. He knew that Lu Yi would decline the offer if he were aware of this. Just as he was worried about Lu Yi would feel the same way about his well-being too, and he wouldn't want to see Li Baxin getting himself into danger on his account. Knowing this, Li Baxin decided to just enter the Colosseum and rendezvous with Lu Yi before making plans for their next course of action. Poor Lu Yi. He might not even be at the second order yet. Why must such a cruel test be laid upon him? How is he now, I wonder? Every quarter of an hour he would check his battlefield imprint to make sure Lu Yi was still safe and sound. Wait, Lu Yi. Hold on. Wait for us. We're coming. Somewhere inside the Colosseum, Lu Yi was sitting at the center of his teleportation ward, counting down the time. More than 18 hours had passed since the gold amulet showed itself to him. In less than a dozen minutes, the amulet would erupt for the 3rd time. All he needed to do was to wait this out one more time and he would be essentially safe after that. By his reckoning, the 24 hours duration would have been used up and the gold amulet should be his to use freely, and there would not be a 4th eruption if his interpretation of the heavens' rules were right. Nevertheless, he was completely prepared to believe that he could be wrong. But at the very least, Lu Yi was ready to see a 3rd teleportation ward sacrificed for the sake of his ultimate safety. He sat there quietly to bide his time. His calculations were correct. Moments later, the same eruption from the gold amulet burst out once more. First the gigantic column of light, then the huge wave of spiritual power. Lu Yi waited until the commotion was over before he once again activated the teleportation ward and he discorporated. Another 200 miles away, Lu Yi was just appearing when he realized that something was terribly amiss. He looked around and there was someone else 50 meters away, staring at him with disbelief upon his face. Evidently, the stranger was flabbergasted to see someone appearing out of thin air. Conveyance through magical means had always been a bread-and-butter part of life as a cultivator. Entering the Spirit Creek battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield all required magical conveyance using the Divine Opportunity column. But that was a magical conveyance using the power of the Divine Opportunity column. The power of the heavens themselves. Few, if any Cloud River realm cultivator was capable of ward magic, and that Lu Yi appeared right out of nowhere greatly shocked the stranger. His very presence here was just like what Lu Yi was concerned about earlier. With prizes lurking anywhere in the Carnage Colosseum, cultivators might be curious enough to explore caves and crevices hoping to find any freebies that the heavens might have kept in store for them. Therefore, when this stranger came by this cave, he stepped inside, hoping to find something most others missed. The booby traps Lu Yi set in place were in the deepest most parts of the cave, and if no intruders ventured far enough, they would not trigger the wards. Therefore this stranger had only come inside for a look. Finding nothing, he was just about to leave the cave when Lu Ye's figure appeared right before his eyes. What an ill-fated coincidence this was. His gaze darted down and he found a pale sapphire glow coming from the back of Lu Ye's hand. Lu Ye too saw the fiery red luminescence on the stranger's hand. Without any warning, the stranger's hand shot up and he fired a spell. The rocky terrain in the cave was exactly what he would like. It was good for Spell Cultivator to maintain as much distance as possible from their enemies. He could just focus on delivering as much damage as possible and he would be just okay. No, wait. Lu Ye cried, but it was too late. The spell missed and whizzed past him. The force of the spiritual powers caused the booby traps to activate and a terrible detonation took place with the stranger Spell Cultivator not knowing what was going on. A frenzy of spiritual power swept through like a tempestuous storm, destroying the teleportation ward set up by Lu Ye in an instant. The powerful impact tossed him up before slamming him heavily against the rock face, causing rocks to fall from the ceiling and rain down in a deluge, threatening to bury Lu Ye underneath a mound of debris. The enemy cultivator fared no better. The self-destruction ward had triggered too suddenly, catching them both off guard with no time to prepare. In a moment of realization, they hastily activated their defensive auras to shield themselves from the blast, but that did not prevent them from being covered in dust and dirt. The dust finally settled after a few moments. Luckily for them both, the cave was sturdy enough to withstand the blast of the self-detonating ward. As the smog was gradually fading, the practitioner waved his hand, clearing his throat a few times. He lifted his gaze and that was when his attention was immediately drawn to a glimmer of aureate sparkle. Chapter 506 Who Dares Win? Amidst the disarray of the mountainous cavern, the spell cultivator's gaze fell upon his adversary who had abruptly materialized out of nowhere earlier, now buried under a mountain of rocks and clearly unconscious. Beneath the tattered face mask was a comely and youthful countenance, but that was not what the enemy spell cultivator was looking at. It was a shimmering glint that had caught his attention. He looked closely and when he realized what it was, his heart almost skipped a beat. A gold amulet. Overwhelmed with delight, the spell cultivator couldn't help but feel that the gold amulet falling into his lap must be some sort of well-deserved providence. As much as he was puzzled by the sudden appearance of this mysterious Grand Sky Coalition cultivator and the presence of an explosive ward, all of his focus and mind was centered upon the irresistible gold amulet gleaming proudly before him. He strode forward instinctively, driven more by greed and joy before rationale took hold and made him stop. Although the explosion of the explosive ward earlier showed formidable power, it would still take more than that to fully kill a Cloud River Realm cultivator. Therefore he should still be alive. And his garb strongly suggested that he was a combat cultivator. This fellow must be playing dead to get me closer. The Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator might not be a genius, but he wasn't foolish enough to not see that coming. If a combat cultivator could get close to him, especially under such narrow and cramped conditions in the cave, then he could expect nothing but an impending and inescapable woe. Knowing full well that he ought to be cautious, he channeled his spiritual power, his hands performing several hand seals. Whether the enemy was dead or not, the spell cultivator needed to fire a blast or two at him just to make sure. If the enemy had indeed fainted, then this would send him to meet his maker for good. But if he was really trying to feign being knocked out cold, this attack would make that a reality. No matter what the outcome was, he was determined to get his hands on the amulet and kill the enemy. As he prepared to strike, he sensed another signature of spiritual power coming from behind him. Before he could wheel around, he could hear something screaming through the air. The spell cultivator swiveled around at once. While the entirety of his vision focused on seeing several aureate scythes arcing straight at him, his peripheral vision caught sight of a figure small and lithe of girth. The spiritual power signature was coming from her and the golden scythe-like projectiles were hardly the only things in store. There was even a huge fireball that she was preparing to hurl at him. When did she get here? The spell cultivator's face fell. As a Cloud River Realm 6th Order, he took pride in his spiritual senses and awareness. Unless it were a ghost cultivator with equal power or beyond, he should have detected someone trying to creep up on him unaware. But he did fail to detect the other stranger's presence. If she had not been launching attacks, he would have not even realized that he was not alone in the first place. That was he. She had appeared the moment the explosive ward exploded, using the clamor and disarray caused by the tumbling rocks to make her way to the back of the spell cultivator. The essence of the maneuver was speed. She needed to be ready as soon as possible and fire as many spells as she could to overwhelm the enemy. There was no way for the spell cultivator to evade. The fallen debris had practically kept him pinned in a narrow and cramped space, and the only thing he could think of was to quickly erect a luminescent shield of magic that he relied on with every ounce of his spiritual power to protect himself from Yi's onslaught. Heavy thuds hammered incessantly on the shield of light, jolting the spell cultivator's frame like the cascading barrage of strokes from a hammer as he was knocked backward foot by foot in piecemeal steps. He felt humiliated, abased, that he was forced into such a helpless corner all because of the terrain. A first order? How dare she? I'll have her hide for such impudence. The spell cultivator was about to launch his counterattack when the spilling sound of rocks and stones rolling to the ground alerted him to something else. Oh no. The spell cultivator felt the surface of his scalp going numb. The sudden appearance of another enemy had made him forget about that combat cultivator behind him. The sharp, impending threat of death made the spell cultivator unleash his spiritual power almost reflexively, releasing a tremendous pulse of force that blasted in all directions away from him. A thin trail of blood trickled down the exposed side of Lu Ye's face, barely obscured by the tattered mask now flapping in the air. It was one of the pieces of debris that had hit him in the head and caused that wound. But the morbid red stream lent a hint of callousness to his otherwise steely calm countenance. Lu Yi drove inviolable straight at the wave of force pummeling him and nearly fell. He quickly recovered and switched to bringing his weapon up for a downward hack. The furious blow from behind could have cloven the spell cultivator into a pair of bloody halves, but his defensive shield thwarted the attempt. Despite having not even a graze, the spell cultivator staggered forward, nearly tumbling forward as he grimaced bitterly at the pain. A third order, he grunted with venom, accurately guessing Lu Ye's rank. The spell cultivator was expecting the worst. For a spell cultivator to be trapped in such perilous terrain, he was definitely not optimistic enough to think he would survive this ill-fated excursion into this cave. But now that he realized that his opponents were a first-order spell cultivator and a third-order combat cultivator, what dread of death in him vanished, replaced by apoplectic rage. "You have a death wish, don't you?" the spell cultivator snarled. He flung a hand at Lu Yi and the image of a giant hand appeared and clawed at Lu Yi. He could easily deal with a first-order later. Right now, he needed to defeat the stronger third-order enemy first. Especially since he was also a combat cultivator who had a geographical advantage in this terrain. Once Lu Yi had been dealt with, he could easily crush a first-order spell cultivator in due time. In the meantime, Yi had not stopped her ongoing barrage of spells pelting at the spell cultivator's shield, its every hit eliciting tiny bursts of sparkles falling to the ground like cinders. As the giant hand groped for Lu Yi, he responded by firing a fire phoenix spell at it. The flaming projectile reminiscent of a bird slammed into the hand and the collision set forth a wave of spiritual power. That gave Lu Yi the chance to bolt forward. With a frigid and menacing glare, the spell cultivator locked his gaze on Lu Yi. As soon as the latter reached within a certain range, he deftly repeated his earlier tactic, unleashing a raging torrent of spiritual power, an awesome repulsive force that ravaged everything in its path. So formidable was this force that even Yi's spells were dispelled before they got any closer to hitting the luminescent shield. Lu Yi seemed entirely unfazed as if the tremendous impact of the repulsive force was as gentle as a midnight breeze. He momentarily paused as the force came crashing towards him, but then quickly resumed his charge towards his target, undeterred. Lu Ye's extensive experience in eliminating spell cultivators had made him well versed in their methods. The ability to repel enemies in close proximity was a commonly employed survival technique among spell cultivators, but it posed no challenge for Lu Yi. He knew that the key to neutralizing such a move was to maintain a safe distance from his opponent. Lu Yi swiftly closed in on his opponent and in one fluid movement, swung his weapon upwards. Next, he brought it down with every ounce of might and speed he could muster. His ultimate move, Flash. That initially surprised the spell cultivator. But he remained calm. Having been wounded by Lu Yi before, he knew that a strike from a cultivator at Lu Ye's level was not enough to kill him. His magical shield had prevented any penetration, but the sheer physical force behind it, despite causing him some discomfort, was still not enough to threaten his life. To no surprise, the blow came down and the luminescent shield was holding. Its sheen had weakened somewhat, but it had not failed entirely. All he needed to do was to re-inject a fresh spurt of spiritual power and the shield would be restored. The excruciating pain of the massive impact contorted his face, causing him to careen uncontrollably backward. Despite his attempt to activate his spiritual power to repair his weakened spiritual barrier, Lu Yi relentlessly pursued him like a bloodhound on a scent, catching up to him and delivering yet another devastating blow. The magical shield grew increasingly fragile. Then came a third blow. A bone-splitting din screamed out, twisting the spell cultivator's expression into one of terror. Frantically, he attempted to replenish the integrity of his magical shield with his spiritual power, but even with his swift efforts, it nevertheless required time. Time that Lu Yi wasn't going to give him. The already dim spiritual barrier had only just begun to regain its strength and shine brighter when Lu Ye's fourth blow arrived. It was all a combination of strokes. With a loud crack, the shield shattered, leaving the spell cultivator defenseless as the blast threw him backward with a trail of blood spraying into the air. Along with the shield, the fourth blow sliced off the spell cultivator's right arm cleanly. The spell cultivator reeled off amid a deafening scream of agony from him. Lu Yi landed on the ground, gasping for breath. Despite his progress, using combination techniques with flash active resulted in a tremendous strain on his body as each strike required him to exert himself to the fullest. The flesh and blood on his arm throbbed and pulsed from the strain, and the angry red soreness gathering through the entire length of his arm, now feverish scarlet, refused to scatter. But it mattered little at the moment. In the meantime, he did not stop hurling spell after spell at the spell cultivator, who had to duck and evade, even in the most undignified manner, as he squealed like a hog. With his right arm severed and the cycle of his macrocosmic orbit interrupted, the spell cultivator's strength was greatly diminished. He clutched his wound, failing to staunch the flow of blood still gushing out the morbid stub, as panic began to fill his gaze. It was hard for the spell cultivator to imagine suffering such a huge loss against anyone weaker than him, a third-order combat cultivator and a first-order spell cultivator no less. The relentless style of fighting was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Reacting quickly, the spell cultivator wheeled around and raced for Yi, firing a spell at her as he drew nearer. Yi quickly dodged it and discorporated as if she had melted into the ground. That stunt confused the spell cultivator, and it provided an opening, leaving him vulnerable to a heavy blow to his back, sending him crashing to the ground with excruciating pain. The spell cultivator had broken the single most important rule, to not expose his back to the enemy. The sixth-order spell cultivator had lost all sense of judgment because of the pain from his wounds. But few could ever remain calm, especially at the sight of impending death. More often than not, their errors caused by the disoriented judgment often have the better of them. The enemy lay in agony with a gaping wound in his back that almost exposed his insides. With his quarry incapacitated on the ground, Lu Yi caught up and stepped on his back. Next, he held his weapon in a backhand grip and drove the weapon through his fallen enemy's heart, the weapon's blade bristling with spiritual power and double sharp edges activated. It plunged through him and poked out the front, impaling his heart in the process. The spell cultivator recoiled with unimaginable pain, the residual spiritual power inside him detonating like a dynamite with waves of spiritual power pulsing before everything went back to silence. That knocked Lu Yi off his feet, slamming him into a nearby rock face with blood bursting out as his saber was dislodged from the body. When Lu Yi finally got back to his feet, there was the spell cultivator, now dead with a pool of red underneath him. Yi quickly scrambled to collect all his belongings and the dead enemy's storage bag that she tossed to Lu Yi before she vanished back into amber. Lu Yi raced out of the cave and sped away as quickly as he could, disappearing into the night. By the time more cultivators arrived because of the commotion the fight had caused, all they found was a disfigured dead body. The wounds on the body showed how furious the fight was, and the winner appeared to be a combat cultivator armed with a saber. That was all that they could determine considering the lack of evidence. Chapter 507 Number 1. After another 2 days of slaughter and butchery, which was just 2 normal days by the Carnage Colosseum reckoning, Lu Ye's name on the Carnage roster had plunged beyond the 80th mark. One could almost say that it was just a matter of time before his name fell further and out of the list entirely. But killing the spell cultivator had seen his name regain a sudden spurt of life, propelling up to somewhere in the 50s. That was an unbelievable increment of 180 Carnage points. Many had noticed the new development on the Carnage roster, including Wei Quebec. He had been combing the Colosseum for prizes while hunting for any signs of Lu Yi. While his search had yielded a trove of treasures enough to make him happy, He was not amused at the lack of information on Lu Yi. Without any hints at all, there was little he could do in a vast space more than tens of thousands of miles in length and breadth. Knowing that Lu Yi was just a Cloud River Realm Third Order, it wasn't hard for him to do the math to make out that Lu Yi must have just slain a Sixth Order to gain that many Carnage points. For a Cloud River Realm Third Order to kill a Sixth Order. Just thinking about it could make him shiver. That would explain why every sect and order in the Thousand Demon Ridge Alliance had been so fearful of this person. Let him grow and one day he might really become a figure that would forever torment the whole alliance at large. If today he could kill an enemy 3 ranks beyond his, he might one day be able to kill a real Lake Realm or even Divine Ocean Realm cultivators. Meanwhile, Jiang Liuzi and his brother too have noticed Lu Ye's name once again making headway on the Carnage roster. Deep inside they were thankful Lu Shu had summoned them, drawing them away from their hunt on Lu Yi, or else, there was no telling if cornered, Lu Yi might be the one who turned the tables on them instead, and the hunters might become the hunted. At the same time, aside from fear and apprehension, the brothers had admiration and awe towards how Lu Yi had fared in this Colosseum. A Cloud River Realm Third Order who was barely hiding, and instead of keeping a low profile, he had been roaming around freely, swashbuckling with complete impunity for a position on the Carnage roster? Is he really not afraid of any reprisal from the Thousand Demon Ridge? If only Lu Yi knew what they were thinking about, he would be in such an uproarious protest. What others didn't know was the time and trouble that he had gone through to build all 12 teleportation wards. What the others did not know was that he had been strenuously trying to keep his head low and just wanted to stay alive. What ruckus he had caused was not of his own volition. It was trouble that never stopped darkening his doorway. And for that, he really was feeling exasperated. At the moment, Lu Yi did not have the time or fancy to look at the Carnage roster. He hurried away from the cave and found another quiet spot where he immediately got to work constructing a new teleportation ward. That took a full hour before Lu Yi could finally breathe easier. He stuffed a spirit pill into his mouth and felt the sensation of his spiritual power replenishing. He had lost 3 out of the 12 teleportation wards he had prepared and had to make a new one, bringing the total up to 10 wards still remaining. He reflected on that last duel. It was dangerous, but he had managed to win because the enemy had been careless. Yi's attack from behind had distracted him enough for him to close distance, plus the terrain itself had given him an advantage. The cramped space had made it easy for Lu Yi and Yi to pin down that opponent and launch their attacks from both fronts. She provided much of the diversion while he went for the kill. That was how they ended the fight quickly. It would not have been so easy if it were outside in the open. He could kill 5th Orders with relative ease and killing 6th Orders would be immensely tricky. But if Lu Yi were to encounter any 7th Orders, then the only thing to do would be to run, flee as quickly and as far as possible. The first order of business remained the same as before, to get stronger as quickly as possible before he walked right into another enemy far too strong for him to handle despite how wide plethoras of tricks he might have hidden up his sleeve. His fox motif face mask had been shattered, which was expected, knowing how the masks were just ordinary face masks. It was damaged when a large rock hit Lu Yi in the face during the fight in the cave, causing him several cuts. Lu Yi removed the damaged mask and sat down quietly. The 24-hour limit of the gold amulet would be up at any time. Lu Yi did not know if there would be a 4th eruption, but if there was, then this new teleportation ward would have to be forfeited as well. Time passed by quickly. Lu Yi was cradling the gold amulet in his arms when a sudden emanation of light burst from it. He dismally watched it with a sense of resignation. The gold amulet surged, firing a powerful beam of light that soared straight into the heavens overhead while emitting waves of spiritual power that every cultivator within 100 miles would sense. Swiftly, Lu Yi activated his teleportation ward, intending to shift himself to a different location. However, he was met with abrupt dismay upon discovering that the next teleportation ward he had selected was no longer accessible. The magical link was no more. That would mean that the teleportation ward had vanished, possibly due to an unwelcome intruder who had set off an explosion that laid waste to everything he had prepared. Despite his best efforts to conceal the ward in a remote and concealed locale, other cultivators must have been searching the place for hidden prizes until they came across the cave and decided to look inside. Fortunately, Lu Yi knew this would happen and he had prepared for this possibility. To that end, he had ensured that every teleportation ward could connect to at least 2 other wards nearby. In this case he still has one more option to pick. With his new destination selected, Lu Yi reactivated the teleportation ward and he vanished, fading into the ether. Lu Yi immediately surveyed his surroundings the moment he appeared, ensuring that he was alone and no one was looking. Satisfied at last, he finally let out a sigh of relief. He extracted the gold amulet from his pocket. The long 24-hour duration had finally passed and the pale emerald glow that wrapped around the amulet was gone. At last, he could put the amulet away into his storage bag without any hindrance. A gold amulet. Lu Yi mused with a certain degree of disbelief and amazement. Losing a few teleportation wards in exchange for one gold amulet seemed like a fair bargain. But Lu Yi wasn't thrilled enough to want to experience this again. He would rather that the heavens select someone else to inflict its divine machinations on instead of him. His initial impression was that 12 teleportation wards would be sufficient for his use, but it seemed that he had underestimated the perils and challenges that abound in the Colosseum. On paper, he still had 8 teleportation wards remaining, but he could not be sure if every one of them was functioning as intended or how many of them had ceased to exist. He wouldn't know unless he were to examine all of them one by one. Nevertheless, activating teleportation wards emitted spiritual power signatures that others could detect. This was reason enough to discourage him from activating any one of them unless necessary. He could set up more wards, but to do that he would need to produce more ward flags. He had already used up his supply with the last teleportation ward he had constructed. As much as he still had enough materials to make new ones, the process itself would also emit spiritual power signatures, which would risk exposing him, which could expose his hiding location. The opening duration of the Carnage Colosseum was usually unpredictable, lasting as long as a half month or even a full one. But in just 2 days, almost 1/3 of his wards were gone. He would need to think of something if he wanted to maintain them until the end of the Colosseum. Lu Yi meditated and trained in the vastness of the cave with Yi handling security for him. With alarm wards set up as well, he was not at all worried about being ambushed. Unbeknownst to him, the entire Colosseum was thrown into havoc the moment he shoved the gold amulet into his storage bag. As a result of that action, his position on the Carnage roster soared from the 50th place to the 1st. His Carnage points, from 550 points, had risen as much as 1,000, making the total sum 1,550. The mere notion of 1,000 Carnage points itself was a terrifying, much less ludicrously unbelievable one. The kill of a Cloud River Realm 5th Order was valued at a mere 40 Carnage points. That would mean one had to kill 25 5th Order to get that many points. While Cloud River Realm 8th and 9th Orders all around the Colosseum had been busy killing and maiming to no end, none of them had come close to reaching that many Carnage points yet. Even second place Xiao Yang's score was a far cry away from Lu Ye's. Most if not all of the rest of the names on the Carnage roster had only 300 to 500 points, and the disparity further highlighted how incredible Lu Ye's 1,550 Carnage points were. There was not one cultivator in the Colosseum who was not shocked by this, notwithstanding those who already had their fingers on Lu Ye's name. This time, virtually everyone was looking at the Carnage roster, focusing on his name with incredulity. The Colosseum was abuzz with discussion. Who is this person? I have never heard of him before, many wondered. That a cultivator could be at the forefront of so many experienced Cloud River Realm cultivators on the Carnage roster must mean this person must be a powerful and strong warrior. But few had heard of the name Lu Yi, especially those who had spent so much time in the Cloud River battlefield that they had little to no recent knowledge about the Spirit Creek battlefield or even anything from the real world of Jianghu. But how could anyone increase his Carnage points by 1,000 in just one go? Have the heavens made a mistake? A Cloud River First Order who killed a 9th Order would still not receive so many Carnage points. But there was little reason to doubt the heavens. The mysterious entity had a reputation for being fair and brutal at the same time. A mistake like this was never likely. Gain in Carnage points doesn't only occur from killing, but also from possessing that special gold amulet. The cultivator who was holding the gold amulet yesterday was awarded 300 Carnage points, someone pointed out. Why is it 1,000 today then? Asked another, perplexed. It depends on the person's cultivation rank and how long they had been in possession of the amulet within the 24-hour period. The lower the person's cultivation rank and the longer they hold on to it, the more Carnage points they will receive. It's the heavens who determine how much they will be awarded exactly. In this case, it's likely that this person has held the gold amulet for the whole duration of the 24-hour limit, and I dare say that their cultivation rank is no higher than the 5th Order, if not lower. Wow, I have never heard of such a thing before. Thank you for enlightening us. To have such a low cultivation rank and yet manage to hold on to the amulet the whole time, "This person must be incredibly powerful," exclaimed a third someone in awe. "Maybe he or she's a ghost cultivator." "Only ghost cultivators who excel in stealth have such an advantage," speculated another. "Nay, I think I know who he is. Louis Yi of the Crimson Blood sect of Bingzhou province. Back then in the Spirit Creek battlefield he caused enough upheavals to rile up everyone. And as far as I know he is not a ghost cultivator but a combat cultivator, and his rank is definitely no more than the 5th order, a 1st order most probably. He's been in the Cloud River battlefield for barely 2 months." "What? A 1st order?" gasped one of them in shock. Any other 1st order would have found it an impossible task to survive in the Carnage Colosseum, let alone hold on to the gold amulet for 24 hours. Even for higher-ranked cultivators, the feat itself seemed unimaginable enough to accomplish. That was how many who at first did not know how Louis Yi could earn so many Carnage points in one go, came to understand how this was just a reward from the heavens for a job well done. A job that not even they, 7th or 8th orders, could boast of completing. Chapter 508 An Incredible Figure. A ray of light landed just outside the Carnage Colosseum. It was Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They had rushed all the way here non-stop for 2 days. Despite the need for haste, they did not recklessly rush inside. They might not have participated in the Carnage Colosseum, but they had heard enough about the event to know that cultivators would be hiding in ambush around the entrance, waiting to waylay any unsuspecting fresh entrants to earn Carnage points. They looked for a secluded spot and sat down to meditate and recuperate. Almost 6 hours later they got up. They looked at each other, a tacit sign that both of them were ready. Rays of light sparkled around them, more than 50 of them, and circled around them, each of them the conjuration of Li Baxian that resembled a swarming horde of flying swords. "Ready?" Li Baxian asked. Feng Yuechan nodded. "Let's go then." The multitudinous shafts of light coalesced as one, joining together to form the likeness of a dragon that coiled around Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, whisking them up into the air before slamming into the scarlet-red wall of light that was the entrance into the Colosseum. The air reverberated with the steely hum of the sword dragon that took into the air in its ferocious splendor. On the other side of the deep red sheet of light, scores of cultivators were waiting for their new prey when a sword dragon of white came blasting through the entrance of the Colosseum. The mere white-hot luminescence of the many sword-shaped shafts looked menacing enough to make any prowling enemy cultivator think twice about attacking. The dragon flew past the unseen gauntlets of cultivators that remained hidden and slithered through the air furiously, speeding away until it was out of sight. No one attacked it. Of the many cultivators that had been camping at the peripherals of the Colosseum's entrance, no one had done anything at all. No one could doubt that that must be a sword cultivator making his entrance into the Carnage Colosseum. The sheer amount of shafts of light prolifically fused into the semblance of a raging dragon was enough to dissuade any would-be assailants from doing anything stupid. What if it was someone incredible? The sword dragon itself was clearly a testament to the newcomer's might and prowess. Then attacking the newcomer would be nothing but a hasty and foolhardy mistake. A few champions quickly noticed that their caution was excessive. But by the time they realized that the sword cultivator that came in wasn't anyone overtly powerful, it was too late. The sword dragon had long streaked beyond their ability to catch up. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan maintained their altitude for moments longer before they finally landed somewhere in the wilderness. Li Baxian dispelled the army of swarming lights and they dropped to the ground one after another. They made sure that they were alone before they finally breathed easily. "I wonder how Lu Yi is now," muttered a visibly distressed Li Baxian. He tapped his battlefield imprint to try reaching Lu Yi. He had not contacted Lu Yi since his last communication to prevent him from being worried about them. Now that they had come in, it was time to find out where he was. He knew that both of them might not amount to much, but he was sure that if he could join up with Lu Yi, they could at least make sure that he would be safe. Feng Yuechan was taking the time to look around them when Li Baxian was busy trying to raise Lu Yi when she looked up. This was her first time entering the Colosseum and she was still curious about everything inside. She had heard so much about how there were prizes abound on every corner of the Colosseum and perhaps this could be a chance for her to see the place for herself. It did not take long for her to notice the giant blood-red pennant magically hanging in midair and once she saw the names, she realized that she was looking at the Carnage roster. Her gaze went up and down every column of names. When she reached the top of the list, those big beautiful eyes of hers went as wide as eggs. For one moment she thought that her eyes were deceiving her. But once she looked again she was right. Right at the topmost were the words that said, Lu Yi, and after the name, it said that he had 1,550 Carnage points. The second place Xiao Yang only had a little more than 1,000 points. Baxian. Feng Yuechan tugged at Li Baxian's shirt. Li Baxian was still trying to reach Lu Yi to ask him about his location. He turned around and looked at Feng Yuechan. Look, Feng Yuechan pointed a finger at the sky. He looked up and saw the humongous pennant. Seconds later, his pupils contracted with disbelief. What? Number 1. The first word that crossed his mind was impossible. With so many champions congregating here, there was no way Lu Yi could have such might and power to be ranked not only first, but so ahead of the next runner-up with a several hundred Carnage points lead. More than 1,500 Carnage points. How many has he killed already? Is that really him or just a guy who shares the same name? But Lu Yi did not seem like a common name. At least not common for such coincidences where two people sharing the same name could be inside the Carnage Colosseum at the same time. Could it really be him? Li Baxian did not know what to think. He had come expecting to find Lu Yi trapped in one corner, fending for his life with perils skulking about, waiting for the best chance to strike. Yet if that really was Lu Yi at the top of the Carnage roster, then the worry and distress that had propelled him to come all the way here might have been for nothing. If that really is Lu Yi at the top of the roster, that would mean that he must be in hardly any danger at all. He's having fun. Nevertheless, he could not tell if that really was Lu Yi yet, not until he asked Lu Yi himself. Lu Yi, that Lu Yi guy at the first place of the Carnage roster, is that you? Lu Yi was sitting right at the center of another one of his many teleportation wards when he received word from his senior brother. He flatly denied, no, that's not even possible. His highest was somewhere between the 10th and the 20th spots. There might have been changes after he had killed that 6th order. By now, he expected that his name must have long dropped out of the roster again. To top it off, Lu Yi had only 3 kills under his belt, amounting to almost 550 Carnage points, which would bring him no closer to the top spot of the Carnage roster. Then it must just be a coincidence. There's a guy here with the same name as you and he's occupying the first place of the roster with 1,550 Carnage points, said Li Baxian while he thought, this fellow must be a 9th order. With this many Carnage points, there's no way he's a low-tier cultivator. Li Baxian knew exactly who the second place Xiao Yang was. Formerly one of the best cultivators of the Spirit Creek battlefield, the Raving Bladesman had once fought against Li Baxian before and the latter knew for a fact that Xiao Yang was a powerful figure who was now beyond any doubt a 9th order. But this mysterious figure who shared the same name as Lu Yi was now the leading participant in the Carnage Colosseum and that would mean he must be stronger and more dangerous than Xiao Yang. What an incredible figure. Far away, deep inside his cave, Lu Yi began to feel something had gone amiss. But he did not dwell too much into it. As far as he was concerned, he has only 550 Carnage points, not the amount that could possibly put him in the first place. What perturbed him more was the fact that Li Baxian had endangered himself by entering the Colosseum for his sake. It was a move that Lu Yi felt conflicted about. He was touched and worried at the same time. To say nothing of the other fact, that was how Li Baxian had deliberately kept this a secret from him. Only after coming in, did he finally reveal that he had come all the way here just to look for Lu Yi. Lu Yi extracted his 10-point map and ascertained his position, which he informed Li Baxian about. We're coming for you, brother. Wait for us. After sending his last message, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan set off for Lu Ye's position. It wasn't too far and flying using telekinesis should have just taken 2 or 4 hours. But they could not risk being seen, therefore they had to keep to the ground and to slower speeds. Quickly they pressed on. In the meantime, Lu Yi waited inside the cave quietly. All in all, Li Baxian coming to join him was nevertheless good news to him. Fighting with him around would mean higher survivability. At any rate, there were still the teleportation wards to rely on in the case of encountering any superior enemies. He did not neglect to notice that Li Baxian said we. That meant he had to be with someone else, which was most probably Feng Yuechan. How powerful they were right now Lu Yi did not know. By his reckoning, they had entered the Cloud River battlefield a few months before he did, so they should be almost at the same level. Moreover, they had spent more than a decade in the Spirit Creek battlefield. The amount of experience and mastery of the skills they had amassed through so many years have made it easy for them to slay even cultivators beyond their current ranks. Especially since no one with just as much talent and gifts as them had stayed so long in the Spirit Creek realm. Yet all the time spent honing their experience and skills barely did any justice to the extraordinary natural gifts they had. Even those of average aptitude would find it unprofitable to linger in the Spirit Creek realm for more than a decade. In fact, such a prolonged stay could have been better spent advancing straight through the Cloud River realm and into the orders of the True Lake realm. Having pondered this, Lu Yi opted not to remain in the cave any longer. Instead he found refuge somewhere else and activated glyph, concealment to shroud himself from sight. Li Baxin was already on his way here and it would be a massive quandary if he were to get himself trapped inside the cave when someone else were to arrive first. He could use his teleportation ward to escape, but that would mean he and Li Baxin would be separated. He could choose to stay and fight, but that would mean a certain amount of risk. Hence, he decided to just wait outside for better tactical mobility and flexibility. He had just settled in comfortably in his hiding spot when he remembered what Li Baxin was asking him about earlier. That made him look up at the Carnage roster hanging overhead. Li Baxin was right. There really was a Lu Yi in the lead. So there really is someone with the same name as mine, eh? That's amusing. His gaze began to travel downward. But the longer he looked, the more the sense of dread and disquiet intensified. Then he reached the bottom of the Carnage roster, where the last name had 530 Carnage points. By his calculation he expected to have 550 Carnage points at least. That should place him somewhere in the 90th odd. Yet he could check for another 100 times and still, his name was nowhere else in sight other than at the top. There was only one Lu Yi in the Carnage roster and it was at the top. Wait, does that mean that I've been calculating it wrong? My Carnage points are not 550? That's impossible. I'm a 3rd order, but I've killed a 5th order, then a 7th followed by a 6th. That would mean that I've been awarded 120, 250, and 180 Carnage points respectively. That would be 550. There's no mistaking it. My rewards are directly tied to how much difference between my enemy's ranks and mine. The figure should be correct. He looked at the name at the top and saw the amount of Carnage points. 1,550? Wait, the number's strange. That's exactly 1,000 points more than what I calculated. Could that really be me? But where did that 1,000 points come from? Just when he was still struggling with what to make of the situation, waves of spiritual power signature from not far away diverted his attention back to reality. He listened, registering the archetypal ring of steel that could only come from swords. Next he looked up. Far away in the corners of the horizon, he could see pulsing waves of light. Someone must be there fighting and unleashing a gamut of spells. He delivered an urgent message to Li Baxin to inquire about his condition. No reply came. Yi. Lu Yi grunted. Yi knew what he wanted even before he said it. She dove right out of amber and discorporated, vanishing into the ground and speeding towards the direction of the battle. Lu Yi sprinted as fast as he could as well. Li Baxin did not reply. That could only mean one thing: he must be occupied by something. Plus he should be arriving any minute now. That would mean that he and Feng Yuechan must have been intercepted by someone and they were fighting, which was confirmed by the clangor of steel and the intermittent bursts of spiritual power waves. Upon arriving at the scene, Lu Yi cast his gaze upward and was met with the stunning sight of deadly rays of light darting through the air in great numbers. Within a confined space, figures were skillfully maneuvering and crossing paths in the skies like shadowy phantoms, locked in a fierce battle. Lu Yi immediately recognized 2 of them, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. The former was fighting at his fullest with more than 100 shafts of light answering his every beck and call, a true display of how deadly sword cultivators could be. Chapter 509 Rendezvous? Lu Yi was right. Li Baxin came with Feng Yuechan and they were fighting side by side with each other. He with his telekinesis and she with her spiritual power pulsing in huge undulations as she fired one spell after another at their assailants. But there were not 3, not 4, but 5 assailants in all. Had been more like. One of them was sprawled on the ground with a spreading pool of red beneath him. There was no telling if he was already dead, but he was clearly put to the ground by Li Baxin no less. Another one was some distance away. His entire person radiated rich spiritual energy as he waved a flag, a ward flag, back and forth again and again. Without any doubt he had to be a ward cultivator and the signature of his spiritual energy indicated that he was a 5th order. So were the rest of the remaining 3 assailants still engaging Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. They were also 4th and 5th orders. Yet despite their superior advantage in numbers, none of them looked like they were enjoying this one bit. If anything, Their eyes were fraught with shock and trepidation, for Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan must be far more powerful than they expected. It was an ambush that should have worked with the elements of superior numbers and surprise. Yet they were not able to capitalize on their advantage and defeat this duo. Instead, one of them was killed. Fortunately for them, the ward cultivator had managed to activate the ward that he had cast beforehand in time, and that somehow evened the odds considerably. Nevertheless, that did not make the fight any easier. The deadly shafts of light with speeds, intensity, and power that could snuff out their lives if they were not careful, plus the powerful spells that never stopped screaming at them, were all enough to make this easily one of the hardest skirmishes they had ever fought in. Where the hell did these two monstrosities pop out from? Instead of waylaying what they anticipated as easy targets, these enemy cultivators knew very well that they had just poked the hornet's nest. But it did not take long for the enemy Fifth Orders to realize that prolonging this fight was not going to end in their favor. Even if they could still hold their ground, the commotion of the fight could attract unwanted attention. All would still be well if allied Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators were to come this way. Any form of help would be sorely welcomed. But if it was someone from the Grand Sky Coalition, then these marauders would have to rue their poor luck. It was a 50-50 wager that none of them were willing to risk. "Hold up," one of them cried at last. "This is just a misunderstanding. Now, everybody stop and take one step back before we do anything else we might regret." As much as they wished to withdraw, this could only be done if both parties had arrived at an understanding, with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan ceasing and desisting just like them. There was little pity for the one who was killed. As an outsider who was only roped in to make up the numbers, the others were more than willing to chalk his demise up to bad luck than to further endanger themselves. The cry did its job. Li Baxin quietly furrowed his brow and dialed back his power. Being trapped in the magical ward might have limited both his and Feng Yuechan's power to 8/10 of their usual level, but the presence of a ward cultivator in the midst of the enemy did not mean that he lacked both the confidence and ability to slay all these enemies. In fact, the odds of success were even higher with Feng Yuechan's help. The magical ward wasn't anything too powerful or complex for them to overcome. For more than 10 years he and Feng Yuechan had stayed in the Spirit Creek battlefield. They might have squandered precious time, but the time had also allowed them to develop valuable experience, skill, and maturity. The enemies were just a ragtag crew of a few mediocre 4th and 5th orders that never stood any chance in the first place. Then again, Li Baxin was hardly a fool who failed to recognize the risks of waging open combat in broad daylight within Colosseum grounds, where untold perils awaited everywhere and anytime. His primary objective remained to regroup with Lu Yi. Relieved at the chance for a parley, Li Baxin grunted his agreement. "Very well." Li Baxin toned down his attacks further. The enemy Fifth Order who sued for peace was about to heave a long breath of relief when a shrill cry of pain slashed across the newly minted truce. His face fell with dismay. That cry was the voice of the ward cultivator. His peripheral vision caught sight of a figure he had not seen before. Creeping up on the ward cultivator from behind, the stranger had impaled his saber through the chest of the ward cultivator, the cool glint of the weapon only veiled by the macabre sheen of blood on its surface. Blasted. When Lu Yi first got here, he immediately saw how Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan were pinned down. With his glyph insight, he quickly discovered that they were trapped in a magical ward that was being maintained by an enemy cultivator. That was what prompted him to stealthily sneak close and deliver his one-hit kill. His poor quarry had had his hands full in dealing with both Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. Their deadliness and prowess had kept him so tense, anxious, and awed that he did not even see Lu Yi creeping closer. By the time he noticed Lu Yi lunging, it was already too late. Inviolable stabbed through his ribs, eliciting a huge fountain of blood out of the gash at his front when Lu Yi yanked it free before it came back in an arc that lopped off the head like a cook chopping off the greens on top of a carrot. At the same time, the swarming shafts of light that had been diminishing and their movements slackened suddenly flared up as if they were given a new lease of life. As Lu Yi decapitated his quarry, the shafts of light all dove at the Fifth Order who called for a truce just now, raining a furious onslaught upon him that he could barely hold his ground as he stumbled backward due to the sheer strength of every shaft that attacked him. But just when he thought he had managed to regain a steady foothold, death came from behind. It was Lu Yi stepping within the bounds of the magical ward, charging straight at them. Inviolable swung in a deadly curve even before he got near. A scythe of glowing luminescence roared through the air and smashed through the enemy Fifth Order's protective aura and blasted a gaping hole on his back that never stopped bleeding in profuse spates. All he managed to do was let loose one agonizing shriek that lasted not 1 second at all before he went dead silent. Lu Yi did not stop. He bolted past the dying enemy still wobbling and churning out blood, to race for his next target, his saber now dripping a slick trail of crimson as he moved. Only after he was far away did the Fifth Order drop dead to the ground. But Lu Yi wasn't anywhere near his next target when the latter was hit by a lightning elemental spell. Serpentine tendrils of electricity snaked all over him, paralyzing him like a giant web of lightning as he slowly cooked to death before a second spell blasted a hole straight through his chest, killing him instantly. On the other hand, Li Baxin swiftly made short work of the last Fourth Order enemy with his flying sword-shaped shafts of light. In barely 10 seconds the battle was over, all thanks to Lu Yi. In the wake of that action-packed 10 seconds, Li Baxin and his junior brother shared a quick look at each other, the former's gaze filled with surprise and marvel. Lu Yi gave a wave and yelped, "Come on. This way." He wheeled around and scampered off with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan peeling closely behind. Yi quickly swooped up what loot she could collect before she went back underground and followed after them. As he ran, Lu Yi took the chance to look up into the sky. His vision homed in on the first name on the Carnage roster, and the dread and apprehension that followed made the corners of his eyes throb, both involuntarily and uncontrollably. Once they got inside the cave, Lu Yi instructed Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan on how to avoid triggering the explosive wards before they finally reached the vastness and safety of the rock chambers deeper inside. They sat down and Li Baxin looked around. His face went alight with amazement. What is this? A magical ward? He could tell that a magical ward had been constructed here, although his lack of knowledge in the arcane mastery of ward building prevented him from identifying it. But Lu Yi had brought them here. That would mean that this magical ward must mean something. A teleportation ward. What? A teleportation ward? Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan could not believe it. They had heard about how talented Lu Yi was in the mastery of ward casting, but neither of them knew that he was skilled enough to construct a teleportation ward. Neither of them had imagined this was possible, especially since Lu Yi was only just a Cloud River realm cultivator. How far can you go with this? Li Baxin had to ask. The further the ward could reach, the greater its value would be. Teleportation wards that could go only as far as a dozen miles were useless, to say the least. Any other Cloud River realm enemies worth their salt could easily close that amount of distance in no time. About 200 miles. Huh? Li Baxin inhaled a long deep breath. Even Feng Yuechan looked utterly bewildered. They might be of similar ranks of cultivation, but they were nevertheless more experienced and seasoned than Lu Yi, and that was why they understood the significance behind Lu Ye's ability to construct a teleportation ward that could scale distances as far as 200 miles. For what it was worth, Lu Ye's skill and gifts in ward casting was far greater than they expected. And beyond any doubt, he had to have constructed several such wards or he would not have chosen to hide inside this cave. With these wards, Lu Yi would be able to maintain his safety even though he was weaker than most of the contestants of this Carnage Colosseum, assuming he hadn't been everywhere causing a ruckus and inviting unwanted attention. Still, Li Baxin could barely prevent shedding beads of anxious perspiration down the side of his face. He had been so worried about Lu Ye's safety, thinking that his young junior brother was trapped somewhere, besieged by mortal threats. It was this belief that had driven them both to rush here at once. Of all the difficulties they anticipated Lu Yi to be in, this scenario was definitely not what they envisioned. But this was unequivocally good news. Lu Yi was safe, and with these teleportation wards, he could easily escape if he encountered an enemy that was too powerful to handle. That reminded Li Baxin of something else, their rank of cultivation. Wait a second, you're a third order now, Lu Yi? It had not been 2 months yet since Lu Yi had made his ascension into the Cloud River realm. That was why Li Baxin had been under the impression that Lu Yi was not in the second order yet until he noticed otherwise. I was lucky. I found a pocket dimension not long ago and that allowed me to earn enough to exchange for several amulets. Yi finally arrived as they were talking. She demurely bowed to Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. My respects to you, brother Baxin and sister Yuechan. You've grown prettier since I last saw you, sister. Li Baxin nodded approvingly. Which was true. Since Yi and Amber's ascension into the Cloud River realm, the former had begun to grow more beautiful as a woman. The praise made Yi so happy that her eyes turned into crescents. Feng Yuechan took her aside to talk, but not before Yi handed the loot she fetched from the scene of the battle earlier to Lu Yi. Lu Yi took the loot from her and laid it down. Then he began undoing the magical seals of every storage bag while he and Li Baxin continued their chat. Lu Yi had taken note of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's cultivation rank during the earlier fight. Both of them were one rank higher than he was, 4th orders. They had been here in the Cloud River battlefield longer than he was. His fortune had been good and so had theirs. To that end, everyone had managed to progress quickly enough. The conversation took a turn and Li Baxin began asking about the recent events in the Crimson Blood sect. Li Baxin sighed when he finally heard that the sect was improving and its future was bright and promising. This is where I say I'm sorry, brother. The sect's present prosperity was Lu Ye's single-handed hard work and toil. Back when he first arrived, there was no one else but him and Shui Yuan aside from their mentor Tang Yifeng. But today the Crimson Blood sect could boast a membership of 700 to 800 man strong, if not 1,000, stationed at its outpost in the Spirit Creek battlefield. No other sect or order could possibly claim to wield similar strength and influence, especially in the outer ring regions of the battlefield. To say nothing of the blessings on the outpost's divine opportunity column that had ensured a level of spiritual chi ambience that few other outposts could emulate. Even the contribution points owned by the outpost were enough to purchase more blessings. Furthermore, the riches that the 1,000 Demon Ridge sects and orders had surrendered as tributes were enough for the outpost to go on operating for at least another couple or more decades. Such were the contributions that Lu Yi alone had made to the sect. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.